WebEx and YouTube live screen will now start. This hearing is now called to order. As this hearing is fully virtual, we must address a few housekeeping matters. For today's meeting, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice that you've not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate by approval by nodding, then the staff will unmute your microphone. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there's a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. You will notice a clock on your screen that will show how much time is remaining. At 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that their time is almost expired. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red and I will begin to recognize the next member. In terms of speaking order, we will follow the order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member, then alternating between majority and minority members that are present at the time the hearing is called to order. Members will be recognized in order of seniority, and finally, members not present at the time the hearing is called to order will then be recognized. Finally, the House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. Last reminder, please ensure that your video is turned on at this time. Well, good morning and welcome to today's hearing. This morning, we are honored to have Secretary Tom Vilsack to discuss his vision for USDA during his second tour at the department. Thank you for answering President Biden's call to return to service after having been the longest serving member of President Obama's cabinet. You are the first cabinet secretary to testify before the House Appropriations Committee this year. And we really appreciate your taking time to be with us today, even while you're still settling in and working on your long to-do list. We look forward to hearing your thoughts on key priorities over the year ahead. Let me also take this opportunity to say thank you for moving quickly to resume assistance payments to farmers and to implement the American Rescue Plan. Swift actions are desperately needed to lift rural America out of the pandemic, especially our small farms and food insecure populations. Well, the pandemic and climate change present new major challenges, while obstacles related to access to nutritious food, a stable farm economy, racial justice, and developing communities in rural America still persist. Addressing these issues while continuing to effectively deliver the services of the department is certainly going to require a lot of hard work and our best efforts, and we pledge to work with you collaboratively. While we only have the bare outlines of the fiscal 2022 budget, we'll talk about it. In addition, I'm particularly interested in understanding how the American Rescue Plan will feed into ongoing and future efforts at the department. I look forward to working with you to build upon the investments that were made in the Rescue Act related to rural health care, assisting socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, and carrying forward the technical assistance, outreach, research, and education programs to benefit the many groups that your department serves. I look forward to working closely with you to advocate for our farmers, our ranchers, and our rural communities. Let me add Mr. Secretary, that I want to personally thank you for your early and responsive conversations regarding staffing at the department with competent and diverse staffers, a team that can carry out the very important mission of USDA. I look forward to your testimony. And now let me ask our distinguished ranking member, my partner, Mr. Fortenberry, if he has any opening remarks, and if so, and I presume so, I'd like to recognize him at this time. Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'm so grateful for your leadership, your willingness to host this first hearing with the Secretary of the new administration, and Secretary Vilsack, welcome. It's good to see you again. I have a simple question for you. How's the new job, or should I say, how's the old job regenerated? Something like that. I'd like to hear your perspective and your vision. And frankly, that's what I want to talk to you about today. Just a couple of big ideas. The primary one being what I call the farm of the future. As I see it, it is the wedding of high tech and high touch, connecting the rural to the urban, the farmer to the family, the farm to the table. It's about a recreation of food culture and the use of technology to advance precision agriculture, to increase yields and revenue to the farmer, as well as advancing environmental science and security as we feed ourselves and feed the world. Mr. Secretary, as you know, America has such extraordinary natural resources, and we understand the value of stewardship of our land and also the history of technology transfer from our university systems that has created the space of American greatness through agriculture. We are so successful that we often forget. And last year, I should point this out, Secretary Vilsack, Secretary Perdue did visit my district, and I'd like to extend the same invitation to you as soon as it's possible. And what I'd like to point out is that we had everyone at the table, from traditional livestock producers, row crop producers, even a pair of twin young men who are part of a fifth generation farm, who have used entrepreneurial skills to buy the local bar on Main Street and have started growing hops for specialty whiskey production and other value-add products. An amazing reality TV type of story. In addition to that, we had a young first-generation American from Africa who started a niche livestock business, specialty vegetable producers, even one gentleman who has transformed a city block in Lincoln, where I live, into an urban farm. The point of all this is that we have a very large agricultural family, and it's an exciting space to consider how we align the department's expertise with this reality and new vision for agriculture. Let me discuss, Mr. Secretary, a couple of particular seize the moment options. First, it's rural broadband. And as much as I dream about megabytes and megapixels, I really think we should try to move beyond the term rural broadband to what I call a ecosystem of livability. In fact, I've said this term, ecosystem of livability, so much that Chairman Bishop is even starting to like it, I think. I may have convinced him. Anyway, the point being, this pandemic has given rise to a digital leap. And it's about telehealth and distance learning and telework and precision agriculture and e-commerce for our small businesses in our rural communities. This truly is a transformative moment if we can properly seize it. And here's the concern. When the Inspector General came to visit us recently, I asked her the question, what is the outcome metrics for success in these programs? And she said, I don't know. That's a place where we have to work together to ensure that the funds that we're expending can actually meet the holistic needs of rural communities. Second, Mr. Secretary, I want to raise the issue of the Blue Ribbon Commission for Higher Education. You were kind enough to discuss this with me in an earlier phone call, and Chairman Bishop and I have discussed this as well regarding the possibilities of new emerging consortia between 1862 and 1890 institutions, the modernization of ag research to fit the farm of the future, the values propositions for students as we wed traditional ag sciences like agronomy and animal husbandry with new emerging sciences such as environmental studies, conservation, and international development. And I'd like to request that you press NIFA now that this is a law, to ensure that this work gets underway quickly. We'd appreciate that. Third big idea, Mr. Secretary, conservation. Our world is screaming for meaning. And I don't believe that any person or anything should be thrown away. And it's this deeper value of conservation, of being a good steward of the gifts of our natural resources, properly using them for our own well-being, but also regenerating them for our well-being, is a 21st century ethos that I believe has deep meaning. The question becomes then, how can we use our conservation programs for a couple of outcomes? Enhanced environmental gains combined with healthy harvesting and enhanced revenue to the farmer to meet the real possibility of sustainability, which is both regenerative and valuable at the same time. Sustainability is those two things, regeneration and return. And as we all know and celebrate, our farmers and ranchers are the first stewards of the land. So, Mr. Secretary, I know this is a bit of a more of a lighthearted opening, but I think frankly, people are fatigued by all of the government infighting. Let's get some good things done together. Look forward to working with you. Thanks so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. As usual, you're very eloquent as well as elegant. Let me take this opportunity to welcome the chairwoman of the Full Appropriations Committee, who is with us this morning, and I'm certain that she would like to have some opening remarks as we greet and welcome Secretary Vilsack. So at this time, I'm pleased to recognize Chair Rosa DeLauro, the gentlelady from Connecticut, Chair of the Appropriations Committee. Ms. DeLauro, you are now recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I want to say a thank you to you and to Ranking Member Fortenberry for the opportunity to speak here this morning. Secretary Vilsack, welcome back to the Appropriations Committee. I look forward to your testimony on the administration's 2022 discretionary budget request and your vision for the department in the year ahead. It was a pleasure to work with you during your first term as secretary, and I admire your deep dedication to American agriculture and rural America. Please know that the invitation is always open for you to come to visit Connecticut to see firsthand the state's diversity, our family farm dairies, nursery greenhouse operations, our specialty crop growers, and farmers in my district and across Connecticut are models of regenerative agriculture and sustainable food production. And my city of New Haven is one of the few cities in the country with a full-time food policy director dedicated to reforming the food system and promoting urban agriculture. The COVID-19 pandemic created the largest public health and economic crisis in a generation, and our food system was not spared. Early on, farmers faced severe supply chain disruptions that shut down their markets and threatened their livelihoods. And I appreciated your assistance and the insight that you provided to me and to my staff last summer as we were trying to address this issue. Some of the problems have been addressed while other challenges remain. The pandemic has also pulled back the curtain on the food and nutrition crisis that continues to plague our nation. According to the U.S. Census Bureau's Household Pulse survey, hunger remains nearly 3 times higher than the pre-pandemic level. And households with children are more likely to report not getting enough to eat, with as many as 11 million children living in a household facing hunger, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. That is unconscionable. I believe that you believe it's unconscionable. And it was Senator Robert Kennedy that said, and I quote, "I believe that as long as there is plenty, poverty is evil." The skyrocketing hunger adds to the longstanding inequities of our food system, including issues like food deserts, which restrict access to food, but importantly, fresh and healthy foods, which you're so concerned about, and disproportionately the impact on low-income people and families of color. It's especially concerning because we know that diet-related chronic diseases like obesity, hypertension, worsen COVID-19 outcomes. So in the context of building back better, Mr. Secretary, I would say you are going to be very busy. I want to thank you for your swift action in implementing the American Rescue Plan, which extended the 15% food stamp increase from the pandemic EBT program. I look forward to collaborating and partnering with you on our shared priorities, which is why I'm pleased by the initiatives outlined in the discretionary request released last week. The request expands investments in rural economies aimed at increasing quality of life and reducing persistent poverty in rural areas, which I know is an important focus for our subcommittee chairman, Mr. Bishop. Additionally, the request addresses racial equity in agriculture by increasing funding for the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights and establishes an equity commission to review the distribution of farm programs. These efforts would build on the $5 billion in debt relief to Black, Brown, and Native farmers in the American Rescue Plan. I appreciate the commitment to this issue of systemic discrimination. I am pleased with the increased funding for USDA science and research agencies, which had to endure 4 years of repeated attacks. Agencies like the Economic Research Service, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture were targeted, hollowed out, and moved from Washington, D.C. And your task is to rebuild and refocus these agencies, which have long been trusted for their unbiased research and expertise. And agricultural research is as important now as it has ever been. I believe that research holds the key to making agriculture a solution to the climate crisis. We ought to advance regenerative agricultural practices that capture carbon by building soil organic matter. And we should pursue parity in research funding for alternative proteins. The United States can continue to be a global leader on alternative protein science, and these technologies can play an important role in combating climate change and adding resiliency to our food system. I also welcome the $74 million increase to the Food Safety and Inspection Service to bolster small and regional meat processing. FSIS's resources disproportionately go to the big corporate meat packers. That is a problem because, according to the department's own data, while consolidation in the meatpacking has increased since 2000, consumer prices for beef, pork, poultry skyrocketed by 82%, 44%, and 33%, respectively. It is time we rethink current policies that have allowed monopolies to flourish at the expense of farmers and consumers. And speaking of FSIS, I want to personally let you know how disheartened I am by the agency's actions over the last year. During the pandemic, workers in meat plants have been treated as expendable and exploited. A recent Freedom of Information Act request obtained emails with industry representatives and showed that FSIS leadership, many of whom are still at the agency, spent more time worrying about the public image of the industry over the lives of workers and federal inspection personnel. Secretary Vilsack, that agency needs reform. Speaking of reform, I believe the department needs to rethink its role in international trade and whether it is tainted Brazilian beef imported by meat packers who sell it here with a product of the USA label, or other food imports from countries with production systems that degrade natural resources. The United States should never pursue trade deals at the expense of American farmers, food safety, and jobs. And lastly, I look forward to hearing more about your plans, exciting plans to fight hunger, strengthen nutrition security. These must be our priority, and I agree with your previous statements. We should fund our priorities. I believe there are areas to act within the discretionary budget as well as the forthcoming mandatory request. But I also want to underscore the urgency of a comprehensive and coordinated response, especially as Congress considers a future recovery package focused on rebuilding our nation's physical and social infrastructure. I thank you very, very much for your being here. Look forward to your testimony, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Laro. We are also delighted to have our full committee ranking member with us this morning. She has worked collaboratively, cooperatively, offering leadership to the committee, and recognizing, of course, that we will have differences of opinion on policy, but she has led the committee and worked where possible for us to be able to find bipartisan consensus. So I'd like to now yield to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Granger, the ranking member of the Full Appropriations Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for those kind words and for holding this hearing today so that we can hear Secretary Vilsack's plans for the Department of Agriculture. The events of the past year have affected virtually every sector of our economy. This is especially true for our farmers and ranchers. Thanks to the staff at USDA, programs were quickly implemented to help those affected by the pandemic. In addition to providing direct support to our farmers and ranchers, USDA provided temporary assistance to families who had their incomes reduced. I'm especially thankful for the efforts of the department and our local communities to ensure children were fed when they were not in school. Not only were our schools closed as a result of the pandemic, of course we know, but in-person doctor visits were limited, and it was a challenge to conduct normal business transactions. So the urgency to close the digital divide in rural America has never been more clear. 30% Americans, 30 million Americans, including 35% of rural Americans, live in areas without any access to the internet. Many small rural communities across Texas and the entire United States need high-speed internet in order to learn, access patient care, and conduct day-to-day business. I'm proud of the investments we've made in broadband in a bipartisan way, and I look forward to continuing to work with this administration to secure additional resources. While I support these types of critical investments in our rural and agricultural communities, we need to find ways to reduce spending elsewhere. After providing trillions of dollars to address the pandemic, we're now faced with the stark reality of the highest level of debt our country has ever seen. I hope we can work together on appropriations bills that adequately meet the needs of our farmers and ranchers and rural communities in the hungry, while also keeping in mind the impact that record levels of spending will have on generations to come. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Granger. And at this time, Secretary Vilsack, without objection, your entire written testimony will be included in the record, and I'll recognize you now for your statement, and then we will proceed with questions. You may summarize or you may give the entire statement. It's completely up to you, but we're certainly happy to welcome you and look forward to your comments. Secretary Vilsack, you are now recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to you and to Ranking Member Fortenberry and to Representative DeLauro and Representative Granger, thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. Normally, I would read a statement, but I would ask the indulgence of the chair to allow me to speak a bit from the heart. Normally, I would talk to you all about numbers and the budget, but these are not normal times, and this is certainly not a normal budget hearing. I think it's important to put this discretionary budget in the context of all of the other actions that are currently taking place and have taken place in relationship to the American Rescue Plan, in relationship to the American Jobs Plan that is pending, the mandatory budget that is forthcoming, and I believe the American Families Plan that is also forthcoming. It is often said that paradigm shifts start with big ideas, and I think that there are 4 big ideas encapsulated in all of these budgets and plans, and I'd like to explain them briefly to you today and put them in the context of this budget. The first big idea is the notion that climate change, while it may be an existential threat, it also represents an extraordinary opportunity to bring profitability back to farming and to rural communities, to create jobs. And we need to take full advantage of that opportunity. You began that process, I think, and we'll begin that process by focusing as well on the American Jobs Plan that has resources for climate smart agriculture, bio-based manufacturing, clean energy conversion. This budget also contains resources consistent with that vision of taking full opportunity of climate, increase in the climate hubs, opportunities for rural utilities to convert to clean energy, a civilian climate corps, increased research in climate, as well as aspects of this budget that are not the committee's responsibility, but clearly important to all members of Congress, and that is additional resources to manage our forests properly. A second big idea incorporated in this budget and the plans that you all have discussed and will discuss is the notion that we're moving beyond the notion of compensating individuals who have individually suffered discrimination. When I was last secretary, we focused on the settlement of the Pigford cases and other class actions for discrimination. We're moving beyond that now to look at how we might be able to root out systemic barriers that exist in our programs today that have created a significant gap between those who've had full access to our programs and those who have not. And this is certainly an opportunity for us to also recognize the cumulative long-term effect and impact of past discrimination and the need for us to close the gap and to recognize that cumulative impact. You all have done that in part through the rescue plan with the Debt Relief Act that we are now in the process of implementing at USDA. You've also created opportunities for new market access and land access for socially disadvantaged farmers to help us close the gap. This budget also reflects a desire to do so for communities that have been dealing with persistent poverty for far too long. We propose the reestablishment of a strike force designed to specifically focus on areas where poverty has been so persistent and so deep, a specialized, very focused effort on trying to eradicate the root causes of poverty in those communities. It also reflects, as Representative Fortenberry suggested, the important role that minority-serving institutions can play of higher education and better coordination with all institutions of higher learning. That's one of the reasons why you'll see increases in resources to the HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions in this budget. Third big idea is the notion that as important as productivity is in agriculture, so is profitability and resiliency. We have learned from the pandemic the need for us to have greater resilience in our system. That's why the rescue plan created a supply chain investment, and that's why this budget involves and increases resources to help small processing facilities create more competition, more open markets, more opportunities for farmers to profit. I know my time is about to expire, Mr. Chair, so let me just briefly comment on the last and fourth big idea, that it's not just about food insecurity in this country. As important as that is, it's also about nutrition insecurity. The fact is we have 18.5% of our children who are obese. We have 70% of our adults who are overweight or obese. It's causing terrific pressures on our healthcare system. It is important and necessary for us to jointly and focus not just on food insecurity, but also nutrition insecurity. Your rescue plan does that by providing bonus resources for the WIC, by increasing the SNAP benefit. This budget also continues that commitment by fully funding WIC, by focusing on summer EBT opportunities, by creating equipment grants so that schools and others can produce nutritious quality food for our children. Mr. Chair, I look forward to the questions of the committee and look forward to working with all of you to carry out these four big ideas that will result in significant paradigm shifts, greater equity, and greater opportunity in rural places.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We will now proceed with questions. As I mentioned earlier, we will begin with the chair and ranking member, then alternating majority and minority with members present at the time the hearing starts in the order of seniority. After that, I'll recognize members not present at the time the hearing is called to order. Each member will have 5 minutes in each round, so please be mindful of your time. I will begin. Mr. Secretary, I understand that you are limited in what you can say about the so-called skinny budget that was released last week, but I'm going to try anyway. 2 questions. First is the Civilian Climate Corps, which the budget says would create a new pathway to good-paying jobs in rural America. Can you talk about the concept, and is there any possibility that that would be under your jurisdiction, under the jurisdiction of USDA? And of course, you mentioned earlier the Strike Force Initiative, which you created in 2010, and for which you're requesting $32 million. Strike Force seems to target assistance to rural areas with chronic poverty. Briefly talk about that and why you so strongly support that. And the second question I would like to include after you address those briefly is regarding rural healthcare under the American Rescue Plan. It included my proposal to provide $500 million for healthcare facilities and vaccine distribution. We wrote it broadly, and while it was developed in the middle of the pandemic, we intended to address also the systemic impacts that are stemming from the pandemic. For example, the bill allows reimbursement for revenue lost during COVID-19 pandemic, including revenue losses incurred prior to the awarding of the grant. A recent study found that in 22 states, 25% or more of rural hospitals were at immediate risk of closure. The pandemic only intensified the financial crisis at rural hospitals. I know the bill was only signed about 5 weeks ago. Can you share your thoughts on how you see this program unfolding? Thank you for your answers, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, the Civilian Climate Corps is patterned, I think, after the Civilian Conservation Corps, which we currently have in the Forest Service, with over 10,000 members who are basically volunteer and or retained to provide assistance and help and to expand the opportunities for the Forest Service to do a better job of maintaining and managing our forests. We certainly at USDA will have a role with reference to the Civilian Climate Corps. I think the fact that we established the Conservation Corps gives us an opportunity to replicate this in terms of climate. What this is really in encouraging people to participate in an effort to improve opportunities to sequester carbon, to better maintain and utilize and embrace climate-smart agricultural practices, regenerative practices, focus on urban agriculture, community opportunities as well. It's very expansive, and I suspect it's going to be an interagency, multi-agency effort, and USDA will play an important and critical role. On strike force, it really is designed, Mr. Chair, to understand that in those persistently poor areas, they simply do not know how to play this game. They don't know how to apply for the financial resources that may be available. Strike force basically creates a team of people that will go into these communities, work with a community building organization that is trusted, be able to identify the problems that the community has to address, and then be able to work through the system to ensure that they receive benefits. In the previous administration, the Obama administration, we invested $23.8 billion in strike force areas. We want to focus on the 380 some counties where poverty has been persistent for over 30 years, persistent and consistent with Representative Clyburn's ideas. On your healthcare program, essentially what we're doing is providing resources to each state rural development office for distribution and application, whether it's a small $25,000 grant that will allow a community health center to stay open, or whether it's a potentially $1 million project that would potentially provide opportunities for telehealth to be expanded into remote rural areas. We want to provide as much discretion and as much opportunity to provide as much help and assistance as possible. A portion of those resources will likely be retained in the national office. So as states use up their state allocation, we'll be in a position to be able to fund those projects that perhaps will move the dial significantly and provide help and assistance. And our expectation is to get these resources out as quickly as possible. I have also been calling governors of states to advise them of the existence of this proposal specifically. I talked to your governor, governor in Georgia, recently, and I will continue to do so to reach out to governors to make sure they're aware of this program so that they can take full advantage of it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Although I have 54 seconds left, I will at this time yield to the ranking member, Mr. Fortenberry, for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, welcome, Mr. Secretary. Nice to see you again. Let me return to something that I referenced in my opening remarks. Rural broadband is more than wires laid and money spent. It's about the meaning of that process. Are we promoting an ecosystem of livability by enhancing telework and telemedicine, distance learning and precision agriculture and all the other potential benefits that can come forth through, again, the digital leap that we've undertaken, particularly during the pandemic? We're spending a lot of money here. It's not clear to me, though, we have the proper metrics in place. So with that said, in regard to the next round of Reconnect Internet grants, how can we do a better job of measuring the success of these high-speed internet investments across rural America? Metrics beyond just physical infrastructure and money spent.
Representative, I think one way is to make sure that the level of broadband assistance and help that's being provided in remote areas is actually adequate to do the job that you envision as part of that ecosystem you talked about. The reality is you can have broadband, but if the downloads and upload speeds are not significant or not sufficient, you can check the box, but you actually haven't improved the quality. One of the things we're going to be focusing on is making sure that there is a minimum level of uptick and download speeds that will make it significant and create those opportunities for telehealth, for distance learning, for being able to operate your business out of your home. We've learned this during the pandemic of the importance of this. Secondly, I think it is important for us to understand there's an emotional involvement here. For those of us who have been isolated during COVID, the ability to have FaceTime and Skype and the ability to see our children and our grandchildren incredibly important. That's part of that ecosystem you talked about. If you don't have the proper speeds and if you don't have the understanding of how these technologies can be used, you may not fully take advantage of them. So I think in addition to installing the wire or having the 5G or whatever it is, you also have to have some opportunities for community colleges or others to basically help train individuals to fully utilize the technology as well. Young people certainly understand it. People my age, maybe not so much, but we ought to all be able to use this resource.
It's also a question of cost. When you have a mother writing to me that she's sitting in the school parking lot trying to access the free Wi-Fi so her child can do the homework that's assigned in a community that is a little bit larger than our traditional definition of rural, but it's rural in character, there's another level of difficulty there, a cost issue.
I think it requires coordination between USDA and the other agencies that have impact and effect on this. There is a substantial amount of money in the rescue plan and an even greater amount of money in the jobs plan. Depending upon what you all decide to do, there's going to be significant resources, and that's important. You have to fund this. There's no question about it. But you also have to make sure that it's used properly and understood the power of it. And I think there is a responsibility that we have to make sure that those resources are well spent.
Well, let's all keep thinking critically on the question, because again, I think we're in a transformative moment in this regard. These technologies existed, but they never existed in such a penetration as we've seen and created the necessity. And this, if there can be a bright spot emerging from the pandemic, this could be one in terms of enhanced productivity and well-being. Let me turn to another topic right quick. Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, recently said that the world's wealthiest nations, America, need to go to 100% synthetic beef because of concerns about climate change. Well, Mr. Secretary, you know how that would go over where you and I come from. What I call fake meat, as it impacts the possibility of reducing climate change, which is minuscule in comparison to other problems that we have, would be so disruptive in terms of the nutritional value of beef and the proper leveraging and stewardship of our extraordinary advantages of the resources that we have, particularly where we come from. Do you agree with Bill Gates?
What I do agree with is the fact that our farmers are, in fact, great stewards. And I think that they are embracing the notion of sustainability. And I think we need to invest in that notion. I think there is an opportunity for farmers to embrace climate smart agricultural practices, to embrace animal welfare and stewardship, and be able to allow us to message the ability and importance of animal protein production. I don't think we necessarily can create a circumstance where we bar certain technologies. I think we need to compete. And I think we can compete with the right resources and the right vision. I think we have the right vision. I think the vision that climate change creates opportunity, creates new profit centers for farmers can be embraced. And with the right policies and the right incentives, I think we'll see wide adoption of climate smart agriculture, of methane capture and reuse, of bio-based manufacturing. That is the transformative idea within climate. That's the opportunity to completely change the economy in rural America. And I will tell you, Congressman, I am very, very interested in making sure that my time at USDA is spent advancing that vision.
Well, I agree with the vision as well. And I think we need to tell the story loudly and clearly, as you're doing and as I'm trying to do and Chairman is doing, about the power and greatness of American agriculture. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. At this time, I'd like to recognize our Full Appropriations Committee Chair, Mr. Laurel, for any questions that she might have. Ms. Delora, you are now recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, I am impressed by your focus on hunger and nutrition security. And I know we had the opportunity to work to enact the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids legislation. And new study this week said that school meals are now the healthiest source of food consumed in the United States. So quite an achievement. But I want you, if you could share your nutrition security plans. What ways can we work together and build on the previous success? What are the things that you have in mind with regard to the nutrition security?
Madam Chair, every single child in this country, in a child care facility, in a school, wherever they might find themselves to be, every single child, I think, has to have the opportunity to have access to nutritious, good, healthy food. That means additional resources for our child and adult care program. It needs focus on making sure that we have sufficient resources going into our schools to allow them to expand school breakfast and to make it nutritious, to allow us to have a school lunch program that's available to all and is nutritiously available to all. It's an opportunity for us to essentially inform and provide consumers with the kind of information that will allow them as adults to make individual choices that are in their best interest of themselves and their family. It is a real concerted effort to understand that at the end of the day, nutrition is so important. Let me give you this one example. Your job is going to fund Medicare and Medicaid. $160 billion of that budget is going to be spent on diabetes treatment. $160 billion. That's more than my budget, my entire budget.
Right.
What if you cut it in half? What if you cut it in 75%? The reality is that's diet related. If you have better nutrition, those diabetes numbers go down. As they go down, your resources available for whatever goes up. So it's cost effective for us to invest, particularly in our children, because we want them to have great habits as they go through life. We want them to be well educated. To be well educated, they have to be well fed, and well fed means healthy, nutritious food.
Thank you very much. Let me move to a different topic. I've been an outspoken critic during the previous administration when what I view as the corrupt Brazilian meat packer JBS. They received more than $100 million as part of the department's so-called trade aid package. JBS is eligible, has received additional procurement contracts through the USDA's Agriculture Marketing Service. That concerns me because the Batista brothers, who own the parent company, have pled guilty to violating the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in relation to their illegal entry to and consolidation of the U.S. meatpacking sector. Question is simple. Why are we using federal procurement process at the USDA to subsidize a foreign, corrupt-owned meat packer? And would you agree that this procurement process could be reformed, better utilized to support local farmers, regional food systems, instead of this corporate monopoly? And this is even more troubling if the USDA plans to end the farmers to families food box. Can you comment, Mr. Chair?
Madam Chair, I agree with you. I think we have to take a look at the procurement power of the federal government and making sure that we are incenting and awarding proper behavior, if you will, good employers, folks who support the value system that I think is inherent in the U.S. of taking care of people. I was as concerned as you were about recent issues in our meatpacking facilities in terms of the treatment of workers. That is unacceptable, and clearly we're going to ensure that doesn't happen again. I think there is a process and opportunity for us to look at our procurement programs. I think it's not just our procurement programs. I think it's a lot more. I think it's our regulatory structure and system in terms of the Packers and Stockyards Act to make sure that is being appropriately enforced and is strengthened. I think it is about creating additional processing capacity in this country. I think there are resources that you have provided that will give us sort of creative opportunities to help that local and regional food system, that value-added food system prosper, to create competition, to create greater resiliency in the food supply system. So I think there's a number of different avenues in addition to procurement that we need to explore and need to look at within the department so that we have the strongest, most resilient food supply system, a system that's fair and equitable, that treats people well, and that rewards good behavior.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I would just say I hope we can take a look at what has been going on with JBS. I think you have, all of my colleagues on this committee have farmers, regional food systems that really do need the assistance and the help, rather than someone who is in violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. But thank you so much. I appreciate your responses. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairwoman DeLauro. I'm now happy to yield for questions to the gentlelady from Texas, our ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Kay Granger.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Over the past several months, we've seen commodity prices rise to near record levels. This is in part due to large purchases from China. When China stopped buying, our farm economy suffered. In a recent hearing before this subcommittee, Ranking Member Fortenberry asked the CEO of the Farm Credit Administration if our agricultural economy was too dependent on China. The CEO was clear that any time we're dependent on a single country, we're at risk. What can your department do to help promote U.S. agricultural products so that China cannot put our farmers and ranchers at such risk?
Representative, I worked for 4 years for the dairy industry as president of the Dairy Export Council, and what I learned from that experience was the necessity of having deeper presence in alternative market opportunities. I think you're absolutely right. You can't be over-reliant on a single market, because that can cause great disruption. Southeast Asia is certainly ripe for that opportunity. There's opportunities in the Middle East as well. I think a longer-term strategy has to include Africa, because 1/2 of the increased population in this world over the next 15 years is going to be in that continent. I think there are closer relationships we can develop as well in our own hemisphere. But deeper presence means three things. It means people on the ground who are essentially understanding and appreciating the market, so that we have market insight, so we can tailor our programs and our policies and our products to meet that market demand. It's about partnerships and the ability for U.S. Commodity groups to be partnering with, and our university systems to be partnering with universities and innovators in those markets to create new products that can use U.S. ingredients to produce what customers want in those markets. And it's about promotion. It's about continued promotion, continually telling the American story of agriculture in terms of safety and stability of our supply and our capacity to be innovative. I think if you deepen presence in those additional markets, you're going to see less reliance on China over time, and a more diverse and more balanced and more resilient system.
Thank you. A second question. As I mentioned in my opening statement, over 1/3 of rural America lacks adequate broadband. You have a successful program at USDA that has bipartisan support, and the subcommittee has provided you with more than $2 billion over the past 4 years to fund it. Yet you have not released the funding for fiscal years 20 and 21. Can you provide us an update on your plan for requesting proposals so the internet providers can deliver this critical need in rural America?
The guidance we were providing to the industry was a bit confusing. We have simplified that guidance, which will allow more communities potentially to access those resources. And I would expect and anticipate you're going to see the distribution of those resources in the very near future, now that we have sort of simplified and clarified the rules under which the program is going to operate. I will say, as I responded to Representative Fortenberry, we're going to be very sensitive to making sure that as things are expanded, they're expanded in a meaningful way, which means that you've got uploads and download speeds that actually make sense in today's world. But I think you're going to see much more progress on that over the course of the next several months.
I certainly hope so. I've got a little time left. I've heard from farmers and ranchers in Texas that they've seen a delay in services from the Farm Service Agency because of the Biden administration's limiting offices to 25% worker capacity. I understand the concern for the safety of your field staff, but have you provided flexibility to increase worker capacity at these county offices, especially during planting season, which is vital? Also, when do you expect to allow these offices to return to full capacity?
I want to reassure you that we are tracking the activities and workload to make sure that we're on track. And I can assure you that based on that evaluation, we are basically at the same level of service in terms of signups, et cetera, as we were pre-pandemic, which I think is a testimony to the incredible work of our farm service folks. We have provided flexibility. We received flexibility on the 25% rule. So those folks who want to get in and can get in a socially distanced and safe way, we're allowing that to happen. Those who have concerns about this are still allowed to continue to work at home. We have a work safety plan. We're going to obviously be guided by that to make sure that when we reopen fully and completely, we do so where the workforce feels comfortable and confident that they're.
Let's go back to the delay in service. Let's go back to the delay in services from the Farm Service Agency. Are you saying there hasn't been that hasn't been a problem?
It has not been. We've tracked it. I'm happy to provide you the charts to show you the level of signups and for the last several years, and we are right on track to where we were pre-pandemic.
Please do that.
There may be an individual circumstance, but I will tell you, system-wide, we are doing exactly what we've always done.
Okay, yeah. Send me those and I'll appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Very well.
Thank you very much, Ms. Granger and Mr. Secretary. At this time, I'm pleased to yield to the Subcommittee Chair of Interior, Ms. Shelley Pingree, the gentlelady from Maine. You may now be recognized to ask your questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for holding this hearing, and Mr. Secretary, really appreciate your time with us today, and thank you so much for your opening remarks, really focusing on the important big ideas that are a critical part of your agenda and this administration's agenda. And I want to say I really appreciate your deep level of understanding of engaging farmers and the importance of being our partners in climate change and the opportunities that are there for increased revenues for farmers, as well as the important role that they can play using agriculture as a really important tool to sequester carbon and do so many of the other things we need to do around renewable energy and new products, as well as making sure we finally deal with racial injustice issues and food insecurity, and understanding that food insecurity is much more about nutrition and the quality of the food, not just calories. So I didn't mean to repeat your speech, but I just appreciate so much the direction you're taking us in here. So I want to go from the big picture down to kind of like the minutia a little bit. I'm really interested in the climate hubs. It's an important part of the funding in my bill, the Agricultural Resilience Act, and I know you're talking about increasing their funding by $40 million next year. I think they're a little understood part of what's already been set up at the at the USDA, how the Forest Service plays a role in this, but just the benefit that could be if we really enhance their capacity and increase their funding. Can you just talk a little bit about that and how you see them being used?
It's a coordinated effort between the Forest Service, NRCS, and our research efforts at USDA, and it's designed to provide a quality assessment of the risk associated with climate, and most importantly, creating opportunities to work with farmers, ranchers, and producers on mitigation and adaptation strategies and embracing climate smart agricultural practices so that we reduce the risk and we don't suffer a decline in production. We're capable of continuing to produce the abundance and to do it in a sustainable way. Tremendous partnership, well used, but not as well known. And this is an opportunity, I think, for us to really ramp up our capacity to provide the knowledge and the information necessary for farmers. I think farmers are really, really ready for this. I think they're hungry for this. They need the information, they need the knowledge, they need the expertise. And so as a result, we need those climate hubs to ramp up. We need those climate hubs to be more active. To do that, they're going to need a few more folks. They're going to need a little bit of additional resource. That's why we've put it in the budget.
Great. Well, again, I just want to thank you for doing that. I think it's really important to have that emphasis. I just want to say that our land grant university has let us know that they particularly benefit from them. That's one of the regions where there actually has been at least some amount of funding. And coming from the most forested state in the nation, where we care deeply about climate change, but also about opportunities for forest innovation, forest practices, the role of the forest in sequestering carbon. I think it's particularly been important to us, but they're definitely under-resourced, and I'm glad to see you doing that. And I also think they play an important role in this ability to translate the abstract goals that we have down to, how do we really actually provide assistance to farmers in making these transitions, and as you said, reducing the risk. My second point is about the organic livestock and poultry practices rule. I feel like I'm always the one on the committee that has to either go back to origin of livestock or this one. So can you give us a little sense of, where we are with that? What's the timeline for restoring it? It seems like, it's been so hopelessly delayed. And, well, all the details, but when can we look for that?
Well, I think the reality is that concerns were raised about the economic analysis. Concerns have been raised about the way in which both the Obama administration and the Trump administration have been handling these rules. So we're essentially going to start from scratch to make sure we do it right. And on the livestock rule, we're going to provide additional opportunity for input on a couple of tweaks and changes that we've made. So that once we get that input, that part should be advanced fairly soon. The origin issue may be a little bit more complicated. The poultry issue may be a little bit more complicated because I think we need to start from scratch. We need a proper analysis. We need to make sure we have the strongest possible legal basis for whatever it is we decide to do. So that may take a little bit longer.
Great. Well, can you commit that you'll make this a top priority? I just think it's important to resolve this for once and for all.
I agree. And it is. And it will be.
Thank you so much for your answers.
Thank you, Ms. Pingree. And at this time, I'm happy to recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Dr. Harris. You are now recognized for your question, sir.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, for appearing before the committee. I have a couple of my main concern for the Maryland Farm Bureau is the issue of whether or not the estate taxes will be changed under under a Biden tax plan. And if you could just briefly mention, as the step-up basis plus decreasing the exclusion would, I think, be very harmful for a lot of farmers, especially multi-generational farmers. Are these issues that you're aware of?
I'm aware of the issues, Representative. I think it is important to point out that the way these can be structured, there are very, very few at the end of the day, very, very few farms that can be impacted and affected by this. For example, the special use valuation allows a recalculation of value for most farms to get them well under whatever the threshold might be for the establishment of an estate tax. So that is an important consideration. There's also a fairly significant long-term capacity, if there is a state tax, to be able to pay at a very low interest rate. So I don't think the issue here, I don't think at the end of the day is going to result in destruction of the ability to pass on farms. I think there are tools in that tax code that will allow most farms to be transferred without difficulty. I don't know the particulars that are being discussed, if any, but I will tell you that I do know from my own personal experience doing tax returns in estates for farmers for many, many years, that there are a number of ways that farmers can use and do use to avoid estate inheritance tax.
All right, well, I'll transmit that back to the Farm Bureau, but I expect that they know what the situation is in Maryland, and I suspect that a one-size-fits-all approach could be harmful to my local farmers. One other issue that where the USDA got caught up in is a blue catfish inspection issue. I know I talked about it extensively with the previous secretary because the blue catfish, as you may or may not know, is an invasive species in the Chesapeake. It's decimating our rockfish and crab population. And because this is the only fish that the USDA inspects the processing of instead of FDA, it has created a tremendous burden on our fishermen. They don't catch it commercially. They could, but they don't because there are no processing facilities basically for it. And although I think we have $1 million in last year's budget to help pay for some of the inspections, this is of great concern because if we don't carve out the Chesapeake Bay from this inspection regime, then the ecosystem is at risk. And do you know, is there a reason why the Chesapeake Bay shouldn't be carved out from this inspection system and get it back over to the FDA, which will allow commercialization of the catching of the blue catfish and control an invasive species?
Representative, will you give me some time to find out the response to your question? It's not something frankly, I can't answer today. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate that. Again, it's a very specific issue to the Chesapeake Bay, and the USDA normally doesn't do fish processing inspections. So the politics are interesting. One quick issue is the price of edible oils that, for a variety of reasons, has gone up, I'm told, about 300%. And this could be, in fact, made even worse over the next few months. And is the USDA aware of the supply trend issues with edible oils and the potential impact on the food industry?
Well, certainly, we're aware of significant disruptions in the supply chain. Transportation is a serious issue. Congestion at the ports, difficulties with containers. We are focused on that. We've expressed to the Maritime Commission the importance of doing what they need to do to make sure that we can get goods and services in and out of this country more quickly. I think it would be helpful if we could see investments in our infrastructure that would allow that to take place in a more efficient way. So we are aware of supply chain disruption, and we are doing everything we can to make sure that those who have power and control and jurisdiction over those issues are aware and need to take action.
Okay, and just two comments. I agree with you that the problem of obesity in the country. I would suggest that some of the physicians have felt that one way we could help with it through the USDA is to align the food restrictions on the SNAP program with the food restrictions on the WIC program, which basically means that it would have to be nutritious foods. Because, as we expand the SNAP program, as you're aware, we expand the availability of a lot of non-nutritious food as well, that a lot of people now believe in the medical field these foods contribute to the obesity crisis we have. So it's something, if you would think about, it would be great to have the support to, in fact, begin to look at encouraging not only food security, but nutritious food security for Americans. And then just finally, I've met a lot of farmers in my district who are very disappointed. The USDA is an agency that they thought just put farming as its priority. But I will tell you, this farm loan assistance for socially disadvantaged farmers has got a lot of them upset because an agency that they thought was colorblind is now color preferenced. And they worry that this means that the USDA, which is typically doesn't engage in politics, is now part of a woke agenda. And I'll just leave it at that. They're very disappointed because your agency has a great reputation within the federal government for being a non-political agency, and it looks like it has become very political. And I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Your time has expired. At this time, I'm delighted to recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Mark Pocain. Mr. Pocain, you are now recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here, and it was heartening to hear your priorities for the department. So thank you for sharing that. Just so you know, I have a largely agricultural district outside of the Madison metropolitan area, and a lot of dairy, soy, corn. I myself live in a rural town of 850 people. I can walk 5 minutes from the end of my driveway to walking by cows pasturing. So very much a part of my district. We also are the home to UW-Madison, one of the main ag research universities, land grant universities in the country. I would like to extend an invitation to you as well, to the district sometime. I have so many areas I could cover. I'm not going to do it in 5 minutes. But Secretary Perdue did come during his tenure, and we really appreciated when he came by and visited one of the buildings I'm going to bring up. If it's all right, I'm going to bring up 4 areas, Mr. Secretary, and then let you comment, because I think I want to make sure I get these in. The first one is recently we've had an issue with our state not having emergency order in place around COVID that could have cost us $70 million of SNAP benefits every single month. We reached out to your office a while ago. I believe as of last night, our governor has worked out a deal with the USDA that we'll still be able to get it with an executive order signed by Secretary Karen Timberlake. But I just wanted to confirm that because obviously it's very important. Our Republican legislature either ineptly or insufficiently didn't deal with this, and it was going to cost us money, and we want to make sure what we have in place works. Second, as I mentioned, UW-Madison is one of our premier agricultural research universities. On campus, the Agricultural Research Service has a building that Secretary Perdue visited when he was in Wisconsin in my district. And my only regret is they swept the cockroaches out before they had him come by. It's a World War II era building. It's the #1 priority for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We co-locate with the USDA there on a program around the vegetable crop research unit, and would love to make sure that can get prioritized. We do need some assistance and funding for that. And again, love to have you see the facility. Third issue around hemp. I know there's some new rules on the THC comment. Some of my younger farmers especially have been trying to grow hemp, and they've been concerned because the limits were so low that there was a huge financial risk if they had to destroy their own crops. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you see with that so I could give some good information to that. And then the final area is around consolidation. I was very heartened to see that the president's budget included resources for stepped up anti-enforcement in the agricultural sector. But as you know, many areas, including places like Wisconsin that have a lot of family farms, I think we were #1 in the nation for dairy farm bankruptcies in the last year or two. It's been really tough. Consolidations have hit us hard. I would love to hear a little more about what your plan is around antitrust enforcement within the USDA. So I know I gave you a lot there, Mr. Secretary, but I figured that was the best way to do it and let you go at it with the remaining time.
Representative, I think if there's an emergency declaration at the state, your state would be entitled to participate with the allotment. And I think if what you said is accurate, obviously we've moved to a better place than we were after the Supreme Court decision in Wisconsin. ARS has a lot of needs in terms of infrastructure. Certainly, we'll take back your concerns and make sure that they are aware of it and make sure that it gets on the list. And I will let you know essentially where it is on the list. It's a fairly long list because for many, many, many years, we weren't investing as we needed to. We've caught up during the Obama administration, and I think it would continue during Trump's administration, but I think there's still quite a bit to do. On hemp, we did raise we did finalize the rule. It's 0.3. I think it does create some certainty for the producer. The problem now is making sure that we coordinate with our Department of Justice friends so they don't create a problem with our processing community. That's a tough issue, a difficult issue, but we're going to work through it. In terms of consolidation, I got 38 seconds. Strengthening the rules that exist, providing and investing in additional processing capacity that prevents competition, and working with the Department of Justice on a variety of issues, whether it's enforcement and making sure that when there is an antitrust issue, that the remedy actually addresses the challenge, and whatever investigations they have, working collaboratively with USDA on making sure that we're focused on the right areas. I'm down to 7 seconds, and there are other things I could say to you, but
no. In the final 3 seconds, I just want to reiterate my invite to the district. Love to have you come by sometime. Plus, it gets you closer to home. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Pocan. At this time, I'm happy to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Valadeo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary Vilsack. Welcome back to the subcommittee. Thank you for joining us today to testify. A lot has changed since you were last in front of the subcommittee, but I look forward to working with you again in this administration. As you can imagine, I have quite a few questions ready for you, and I plan to submit what we can't get to the record for you to have the opportunity to respond to those that way. but the most important pressing issue that we're struggling with today in the Central Valley. I want to thank you first for designating the 50 California counties, including my entire district, on March 5th as a primary national disaster area due to the ongoing drought. Just last Thursday, you and the Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, released a statement acknowledging the critical drought in the West. Well, I thank you for this acknowledgement. More needs to be done and to help our farmers and our water users in California. Agriculture production is a large part of our economy, but having a safe and reliable food supply is a serious national security issue for our country as well. Would you please tell me how the USDA plans to assist the Central Valley of California as we deal with this horrible historic drought?
A couple of things, Representative. Obviously, we're going to take a look at reconstituting the drought task force and resiliency task force that we had during the Obama administration when we dealt the last time with a drought in California, to make sure that we're taking a look at the full range and suite of assistance that we can provide to producers, and to make sure that we do this in an interagency process to make sure it's not just the USDA, but we make sure that other departments that potentially have equities here are brought into the process. Secondly, I think it's important for us to continue doing research. The better we are at utilizing the scarce water resources we have, obviously it will allow us to deal with drought more effectively and more efficiently. And I think the ARS is very much, our Agricultural Research Service is very much involved in this, as is NIFA. And obviously we'll continue to take a look at the full range of resources that we have under the various programs to provide help and assistance to farmers as they struggle through a very difficult time. So we fully appreciate the challenges they have. We are aware of it, and we will do everything we can to help.
No, I appreciate that. No, I appreciate you bringing up that you would work with other agencies. I think that's important that we have a broad approach to this, obviously very complicated and important topic addressed as quickly as possible. And then another one, and I know I've got a couple minutes here. USDA took bold action in 2020 to utilize monies made available by Congress to purchase billions of dollars worth of U.S. farm products for distribution to families in need through the Farmers to Families Food Box program. While the program was a success in many ways, it also created unintended volatility in the U.S. dairy industry, as cheese was mandated product under the program, and while other products like butter were largely left out of the boxes. This created huge imbalances between dairy farmers driven only by whether their farm was supplying to a favored cheese manufacturing sector. USDA recently held all-day listening session and comment period on the issue, which exposed some of these imbalances. Then today, I was surprised to read in the news that USDA is canceling this important program altogether. This action seems directly to contradict your testimony that highlights the need to address the nation's nutrition insecurity. Why are we learning about this in the news? And although it wasn't a perfect program, this program provided families with healthy, nutritious food options grown here in the U.S. What do you plan to do to provide healthy food like what was included in the food boxes to families in need?
We're going to continue to provide healthy food, but we're going to do it through the most efficient system that we have. The reality is the food box program was set up to respond to COVID. It was a response to COVID. A lot of problems with it, Representative, a lot of problems. There was a significant difference of administrative costs. In some cases, people were charged a tremendous amount just to fill the boxes. There was an inadequate accounting of where the boxes were actually delivered. There was a lot of food waste and loss that we uncovered as a result of these listening sessions. So our theory is that we create opportunities through the TFAP program, through what exists with our food banks and our food pantry system, which is incredibly efficient and incredibly effective at getting resources out to folks. So there's going to be a continuation. We just announced a produce box that will be funneled through that system. We've got the dairy donation program that we're going to set up as well to help the dairy industry. So we're going to try to take what we've learned, the best of that program, and incorporate it into our traditional regular programs, which are very efficient in terms of food distribution. So that way, I think you get the best of both worlds. You get product being used, product being available to people, nutritious product being available, but you get it through a very efficient and effective delivery mechanism that is accountable.
Well, I appreciate that. Making sure that we're actually getting American products to those who desperately need it is a priority. So I appreciate the answers, and Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Valadao. At this time, I'm happy to yield to the gentlelady from Illinois, one of our new members, Ms. Lauren Underwood.
Well, thank you,
are now
Mr. Chairman.
recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Secretary Vilsack for joining us today. 2 weeks ago, I had the honor of visiting the Northern Illinois Food Bank in Geneva, Illinois, and I was able to see up close the truly incredible work that their staff and volunteers are doing to keep the communities in my district fed, despite huge challenges and heightened demand due to the pandemic. During my visit, the Northern Illinois Food Bank stressed to me how the Farmers to Families Food Box program has been invaluable for distributing fresh, nutritious, ready-to-load food to our neighbors. Between March of 2020 and February of 2021, nearly a quarter of the over 1 million meals they distributed were supplied through the Food Box program. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a comment from the Northern Illinois Food Bank submitted to USDA supporting the Farmers to Families Food Box program and suggesting improvements.
So ordered.
My understanding based on news reports from this morning is that USDA is ending the Farmers to Families Food Box program next month. But I was really pleased to see that USDA announced a new fresh produce box program under the Emergency Food Assistance Program, TEFAP. Now we know that the Farmers to Families Food Box program was not without its flaws, but the food it provided has been a lifeline for families in my community. The Northern Illinois Food Bank has valued the variety of food it provided through the program, including the dairy and meat products. They also appreciated the program's flexibility, which has allowed them to distribute food boxes through many more of their agencies that typically can't distribute the TEFAP food. So Mr. Secretary, do you anticipate the new TEFAP produce box program will be able to fill the current need? And are you considering flexibility, ease of distribution, and food variety in the TEFAP produce box program or other food box programs?
The answer is that we are obviously trying to take the best of the food box program and institute it into and implement it into our traditional distribution system. So I think you're going to continue to see the variety. You're going to continue to see the wholesomeness and the nutrition food being made available to folks. I think you're just going to see it in a slightly different delivery mechanism that's much more efficient and less costly, which means that we're going to have more resources for more food for more people. Number one. Number two, we continue to have enormous capacity to purchase these other products and to incorporate them in what is being made available to food banks and to food pantries. And so I don't think you're going to see a decline or a reduction in the diversity of what's going to be made available to food banks. I think you're going to continue to see us being engaged in this. In fact, this budget asks for additional resources in the TEFAP program to be able to do more of what you want us to do. And I think, we've also heard from a number of other food banks that had serious concerns and issues with the program. So what we're trying to do is trying to take the best of what we've heard and eliminate the things that didn't work particularly well, put it into a system that is well known and well functioning to make sure that we continue to get access to as many people as possible with nutritious options and flexibility.
Well, I'm certainly really pleased to hear that. The produce boxes are a great step, and there's obviously a deep level of need that likely requires greater support. So please do let us know about those additional resources that are needed. Now I'd like to turn to another critical nutrition program. I'm pleased to share that I'm pleased to see that in your written testimony, you called out the importance of WIC in addressing the disparities in maternal and child health outcomes, particularly the racial disparities. And I'm the co-founder and co-chair of the Black Maternal Health Caucus, and so expanding WIC is a big priority for me. My Black Maternal Health Momnibus Act includes provisions that would extend WIC eligibility in the postpartum and breastfeeding periods to ensure that new moms have access to nutrition programs that are proven to save lives and improve maternal and child health outcomes. In the skinny budget, the administration is requesting $1 billion increase for nutrition programs, including WIC. Can you provide some detail on how you anticipate USDA would use that increased funding to expand WIC and improve maternal health, including if there are any statutory changes that you think may be necessary?
Representative, I think the first order of business with reference to WIC is to make sure that 50% of participants who aren't participating do. And that's why we were pleased with the rescue plan that provided additional resources for us to reach out to states to figure out ways in which we can be innovative in creating better understanding of WIC and better participation in WIC. We want to close that 50% gap. That's the first order of business. The additional bonus that's in WIC because of the rescue plan, the additional resources we're asking for will allow us to continue to provide a decent benefit, but it doesn't help if people aren't taking advantage of it. We're looking for partnerships. We're looking for ways in which we can get the word out about WIC and make sure that folks fully participate. And I've reached out to governors. I mentioned I'm calling governors. I'm calling governors all across the country, encouraging them to work with us and their Human Services Department to get the information out about WIC. I was at a food bank recently where they put information in the box that they provide to families about SNAP. Well, why can't they also put something in there about WIC? I think we need to look for creative ways, and certainly would appreciate any idea you have that would expand outreach that would enable us to close that 50% gap. It's very concerning.
Yes, sir. Well, I certainly look forward to working with you on that. I yield back.
Underwood, your time has expired. Hopefully you can get back to a second round. I'd like to recognize Mr. Molinar at this time, the gentleman from Michigan. The floor is yours, Mr. Molinar.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back, Mr. Secretary. It's good to see you again. You may or may not be aware that we had a major flooding event in mid-Michigan in May of 2020, and last year's catastrophic flood was the result of a historic rain event and a failure of 2 dams in my congressional district, and it caused about $200 million worth of damage. And the rebuilding and recovery efforts continue as we speak. A major disaster declaration was issued by the president last July, and I'm pleased to tell you that the USDA was one of the first federal agencies to respond, and I'm very grateful for that. The former USDA Deputy Undersecretary for Rural Development, Betty Brand, came to my congressional district with a pledge to support our recovery process, and the Natural Resources Conservation Service has been and continues to be an invaluable partner in providing federal critically needed on-the-ground response. And I'm extremely grateful to your department, but we also continue to need assistance as we continue to rebuild. Last year's flooding was not an isolated incident. My hometown of Midland has experienced significant flood events several times over the last 25 years. And working closely with federal stakeholders like USDA, as well as FEMA, NOAA, EPA, and the Army Corps of Engineers, my state and local officials, community stakeholders are seeking your department's support for innovative nature-based flood mitigation measures to slow the flow of water during flood events and to protect the lives and livelihoods of those communities I represent. The creation of wetlands, conservation easements, and natural floodplains are examples of steps that can be taken to provide flood protection while also enhancing recreational, environmental, and conservation benefits. I'd like to ask you today and the department for your continued support and to work with me and the bipartisan Michigan delegation in Congress as we work together to develop and implement a coordinated federal approach to mitigating the threat of future floods in the Great Lakes Bay region. And I'd also like to personally invite you to come to mid-Michigan to see firsthand the efforts of USDA to date and the work that still needs to be done as we recover and rebuild from last year's historic flood event. Thank you for your consideration, Mr. Secretary.
Representative, I know that our team at USDA continues to be in close contact with the Four Lake Task Force and the work that they're doing in helping to rebuild those communities. We're looking at ways in which the community facility program could potentially be of assistance and help. And certainly I know that the folks at NRCS stand ready to be as helpful as they possibly can with some of the projects that you just mentioned. I'm happy to commit to you that we will continue to be cooperative and continue to look for ways in which we can be of assistance and be part of the team that rebuilds the area.
Wonderful. Well, I'm very grateful for that. And again, I'd just like to personally invite you to come out and see firsthand the work that's been done and still needs to be done. And I'm just grateful for that. If I could switch gears a minute, first of all, I want to be very supportive of your work in rural broadband and your support for that. I think the pandemic as well as the flooding have really demonstrated the importance of that. I also want to just talk a moment about dairy. And dairy farmers, and I know you know this well, make up a large portion of the agriculture industry in Michigan and in my district, and all face uncertainties about the future, especially with COVID. The dairy industry has been caught in the middle of ever-changing meal patterns, particularly dairy suppliers of low-fat flavored milk. And I'm wanting to ask what your willingness is to continue allowing schools to serve 1% flavored milk, particularly given that the 2020 to 25 dietary guidelines for Americans noted that 90% of the U.S. population does not meet dairy recommendations, and also did identify low-fat milk as a recommended nutrient-dense beverage.
You know, this is an interesting question, Congressman, because if you go with the no-fat milk, then kids don't drink it, and you lose the nutritional value and the nutritional benefit of the vitamins and the nutrients that are in milk, the 9 essential vitamins and nutrients and minerals. And so, to the extent that alternative provides the opportunity for us to see more milk consumption, that is something I think we should absolutely take a look at. I mean, at the end of the day, we want kids drinking milk because it's good for them. And so I'm encouraging our team to basically take a look at that issue of, does it make sense to have a standard which essentially cuts off milk consumption, or is it better to have a standard that encourages milk consumption and where you get the benefits? And I think school districts obviously have a lot of issues that they need to take into consideration, but I think our team should be helpful in that respect.
Wonderful. I appreciate your thoughtful approach. And Mr. Chairman, I see my time has expired and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Molinar. At this time, I'm delighted to recognize the gentlelady from Minnesota, the chair of our Subcommittee of Defense, Ms. Betty McCollum, for any questions that you might have for Secretary Vilsack. Ms.
Thank
McCollum.
you, Mr. Chair. I'm so happy to have you back at the USDA, Mr. Vilsack. Your leadership and expertise will be critical in combating climate change, stabilizing our food and agriculture systems, and helping our nation recover from COVID. So your experience will help us in all those areas. The pandemic, as has been pointed out by many, has increased food and nutrition insecurity. But I wanted to focus on some reports that have come back to light. Military members and their families are no different on their reliance for food banks, and we're seeing it dramatically increase. Hunger among military families is not new. The 2016 GAO report, and you might not have had a chance to look at this yet, sir, but someone in your staff can look at it for you, points out that roughly 23,000 military families use SNAP. They spend more than $21 million in SNAP benefits on military bases alone. Many of us thought we had addressed this program years ago, only to find out that we're still having food insecurity with our military. A 2020 survey by Blue Star Families found that 14% of active duty families are reporting food insecurity. The GAO report goes into all the reasons why this happens. It's a great report. And as our chair of the Agriculture Committee pointed out, I chair the Defense Subcommittee on Appropriations. And I'd like to work with Chairman Bishop on this, as well with you, how we can better understand this problem. So if you could get to Chairman Bishop and I, which staff person we should be working directly with, that would be greatly appreciated, sir.
We will get that to you today.
Thank you. At the end of your tenure as Secretary of Agriculture, the U.S. Forest Service took action to protect the Boundary Waters Canoe area, our nation's most visited wilderness area, and it's a priceless reserve of water so clean you can drink it directly from its lakes and rivers. On December of 2016, the previous Forest Service Chief Tidwell denied consent for renewal of 2 expired mining leases in the BWCA watershed, concluding, and I quote from him, that sulfide copper ore mining could cause, quote, serious and irreparable harm to this unique, iconic, irreplaceable wilderness area, end of quote. In January 2017, the Forest Service applied for a mineral withdrawal from federal lands within the Rainy River watershed. But the Trump administration canceled the mineral withdrawal study, renewed the leases without any scientific evidence to justify its actions, to show whether or not that water, in fact, could be protected. Now, I understand the Department of Agriculture, under your leadership, is reviewing those actions. If you're able to, would you share what steps the USDA will be taking under your leadership to address this issue and the threat of sulfite or copper mining in the watershed? And in general, could you comment on the importance of surface land managers like the Forest Service in retaining the right to review and deny consent for mineral leases on public lands, especially when it could impact our public waters, which are the future generations' drinking water?
Representative, very much aware of the challenge and the interest and the sensitivity of this particular issue that you've raised. Certainly aware of it in 2015-16, aware of it in 2021. I had the opportunity to go to Minnesota at the request of former Vice President Walter Mondale, who has a very keen interest in this issue, and spoke to a group that obviously is very concerned about the boundary waters generally. What I can tell you is that we are indeed reviewing the Trump administration action, and we're also working with our sister agency, the Department of Interior, to take a look at a variety of economic analysis that have been done and need to be done in connection with this particular area as we make decisions about what next steps are. I don't want to prejudge what those next steps are until we've had those conversations and completed that analysis, but very, very, very well aware of the sensitivities, and we'll do what we can and understand and appreciate the uniqueness of that particular location. It's something that I'm personally familiar with because our younger son spent a lot of time up there in the boundary waters at Camp Ouijiwagan when he was growing up. So it's an area that was important to our family.
Well, thank you.
So I can assure you, we're going to take it very seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We don't place a value on water, but we hear about all the value on minerals, and life does not exist without water. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Vilsack.
Mr. Chairman, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I recognize Mr. Newhouse from Washington. You're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Vilsack, it's great to see you again. I got to say that during my time as Secretary of Agriculture for my state, and then also as serving as a member of Congress in your last term, your office has always been very responsive, great to work with, and so congratulations to you on your second confirmation, and I hope you're settling into your new old office at USDA. Just a quick question to get us started. You may or may not know, earlier this year, I had the honor of being elected the chairman of the Congressional Western Caucus, which is a group of about 70 members of Congress located throughout the country. Some of our main priorities have to do with agriculture and conservation and forestry, all of those things that are important to our membership. And just wanted to follow up on a written invitation that I sent to you and extend a personal invitation to come and meet with this group of members at your earliest convenience. And I would hope that we could make that happen. Could we do that, sir?
Yes, happy to visit with those folks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Secondly, as many other members have done, I'd also like to invite you to come to my state. As you know, Central Washington, where I represent, is a very diverse agricultural region. Gosh, we grow everything, I would say, from A to Z, but you've heard of Washington apples. Certainly our cattle and dairy industry is very significant. Wine grapes, many other kinds of fruit, cherries, certainly. Wheat is a big deal. And I know from your previous work at USDA, as well as in the private sector, you understand, and I've heard you say, farmers and ranchers are truly the original conservationists and are stewards of the land that they work. And So I would appreciate your time if you could to meet with Central Washington farmers, ranchers, to understand how growers continue to innovate on smart climate practices and see firsthand how a one-size-fits-all solution in the name of climate does not work for all of agriculture. It would be good as you make further announcements along these lines to please, and I know you will, but solicit input from growers in program crops as well as specialty crops. But I want to touch on a couple things in my time. First of all, on trade. And thank you for your comments so far, your positive comments. You understand the importance of trade to our industry. And I appreciate your urging that Congress begin working to reauthorize the TPA, the Trade Promotion Authority. Free, fair, and open export markets certainly are critical to the state of Washington's agricultural industry. I've got to tell you though, sir, many agricultural stakeholders are concerned at the tone President Biden has been taking on trade negotiations, implying that domestic matters are more important and trade agreements have not previously been beneficial to U.S. workers. And I would just like to note that nearly 40% of the jobs in my state, the state of Washington, are directly tied to trade. So my question is, what do you plan to do to move the White House forward on trade on behalf of U.S. agricultural stakeholders?
Our job at USDA is to make sure that the U.S. Trade Representative's office is fully aware and appreciates the importance of agriculture in those negotiations and in the implementation of agreements. I've already had conversations with the U.S. Trade Representative, Ambassador Tai, on implementation of USMCA, on approaches to China, on issues relating to Japan and beef access. So we've had those conversations. We've also had opportunities to reach out to the State Department to make sure that they're fully aware of agriculture's interests in a variety of areas around the world as issues unfold. It can have an impact on trade relationships. And finally, I've spent a good deal of time in the first several months of my tenure here reaching out to ag ministers from all over the world, trying to develop a coalition of ag ministers committed to climate change and a coalition of ag ministers committed to a science-based and rules-based system. And I've had positive conversations recently with folks, particularly in our hemisphere.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I see my time has expired, but I do hope to have another opportunity. But I appreciate very much your meeting with us this morning, Ms. Secretary, and look forward to a continued productive working relationship. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Newhouse. At this time, I'm delighted to yield to the chair of the Milcon VA Subcommittee of our Appropriations Committee, Ms. Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And I'd like to just take the opportunity on behalf of the subcommittee to extend our deepest condolences on her recent loss of her mother. We're delighted that you're with us today. And at this time, I'm happy to yield to Ms. Wasserman Schultz for your questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your condolences and the condolences of so many of my colleagues. Mr. Secretary, welcome and welcome back. We're thrilled to have you in the leadership role that you're in once again. I want to touch on a couple of things. First, on food insecurity among Florida's Hispanic community, and then also on the invasive species problem we have, particularly in Florida, as well as Florida citrus. COVID has continued to exacerbate an already serious food insecurity problem nationwide, but especially among Hispanic and immigrant families who live in Florida. According to Unidos US, Hispanic children in Florida are more likely to have experienced food insecurity during the pandemic. And by mid-October, nearly 20% of Hispanic households with children reported that their household sometimes or often did not have enough food to eat in the past 7 days, compared to 11.6% of non-Hispanic white households that didn't have enough food. Federal nutrition programs like SNAP, and PEBT are critical to addressing food insecurity during COVID, but Hispanic children and families facing multiple systemic and structural barriers to participation in food assistance programs have particularly limited language access services and inadequate community outreach about the program. So I'd like to ask you, how can the USDA better target investments in Spanish language and culturally relevant information, as well as trusted, culturally competent, and community-based organizations in order to help reduce those long-standing disparities in food access among Hispanic and immigrant households?
Representative, I think I would just incorporate my answer in your question, the way you've posed it. I mean, the reality is we need to do a better job of working to communicate with folks in a way that they understand and in a way that they trust. We certainly did that when I was secretary before. We got participation rates in SNAP to record levels. Sometimes we also have to work and make sure that the states are doing their job, because at the end of the day, states administer this program. And so I think it's going to be important for us to take a look at where Florida is relative to their outreach and the works and efforts that they are in terms of the resources we're providing to the state for outreach, for education, et cetera. So I think it's partly reaching out to the states, partly making sure that we are doing our job of making information available. And frankly, part of it is also taking a look at the level of the benefit. Folks can be hungry even if they do get SNAP, because the benefit level, I think, needs to be examined. Certainly, we're appreciative of the fact that Congress has increased it, and we've put that into play, and that should be of some help to the families that are participating in the program today.
I think it's so important that USDA make this a priority. It is so critical, and thankfully, the Biden administration has reversed the public charge rule. So how is USDA ensuring that all eligible immigrant children and families who need access to food assistance are able to receive it?
Well, we reached out to Department of Homeland Security, encouraging that action and certainly applauding it, and making sure that our counterparts in the states are fully aware and appreciative of the fact that that change has taken place. Again, it's states that administer this program. We want to make sure that they have the right information and that they're applying the right set of rules and right set of lenses, if you will, to applications. You know, part of this is also, I think, taking a look at the application system itself, and making sure that we're doing it in a way that is as easy as it can be, to make sure that people participate in the program. Sometimes our application processes can be confusing and difficult, and sometimes cumbersome, which can oftentimes discourage people from participating. That's particularly true of seniors. And I'm not sure whether in the Hispanic communities, whether seniors are participating at the rate they should, but oftentimes it's because of the complicated application process.
The public charge rule, obviously inundated so many Hispanic and immigrant families. And so making sure that they know that they are once again eligible is really critical. I want to turn in my final, just more than a minute, to the agricultural quarantine inspection program, because that's vital for inspecting imported commodities that come in through Florida's ports, so we can protect against invasive plant and animal pests. It's a user fee-based, as you know, program, so the decline in international travel has affected the program's bottom line. The Corona bus provided more funding to address the user fee shortfall, but as we put together the FY22 appropriations bill, it's really vital for AQI to have the funds necessary to continue this critical work so we can keep invasive pests from devastating our agriculture industry. That's the number 2 economic driver in the state of Florida. Citrus greening has been really intensifying as a result of that invasive species problem. So can you speak to the importance of the program and whether AQI has the funds necessary to continue operating effectively?
Well, it was certainly appreciated the fact that Congress did provide the resources. I think it was over $600 million to basically get that budget back in order. You are absolutely right. That is the first line of defense. And invasive species can be absolutely devastating. You've mentioned citrus greening. Certainly don't have to tell anybody from Florida or Texas or California or Arizona the concerns they have about the citrus industry generally. We've invested a lot of resources in that particular area. Over 110 projects have been invested in on citrus greening alone, millions and millions of dollars. So very high priority, very important, got to be adequately funded. I think it is adequately funded so long as the fees are coming in. If the fees aren't coming in, then you need to supplement or provide additional resources. Hopefully with trade getting back, when we get to the other side of COVID internationally and we get some of the snags in trade taken care of, we should see those resources begin to fill back up again, and we shouldn't have as much of a threat or concern as we had during COVID.
Thank you so
Ms. Wasserman Phillips.
I'm expired.
Your time has expired. At this time, I'd like to recognize Mr. Cuellar of Texas, a member of the Defense Subcommittee, for any questions that you might have, sir. You are now recognized. Mr. Cuellar.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for your leadership in this subcommittee. Mr. Secretary, it's a pleasure seeing you again. I'm so happy that you're back as the Ag Secretary. I have two questions for the records on quality loss of WIP Plus program and school meals standards that I'm going to go ahead and submit for the record. So if you can get back to me on that. But what I want to talk about is how do we help kids from third world conditions, literally millions of them. And I'm not talking about Salvador, El Salvador, Honduras, or Guatemala, but I'm talking about kids in the border, U.S. border called colonias. They have no water, many times no water, no sewage, no electricity, no streets. The educational system need a lot. So I'm talking about helping U.S. kids that are on our side on colonias. Your agency has a definition for colonias, as you know, and I certainly want to see if we can talk about if you can designate somebody I can work with, because the colonias, we're talking about almost 2.5 million individuals that live in third world conditions. 145 colonias are in New Mexico, 114 colonias are in Arizona, 34 colonias are in California, and Texas, especially South Texas, where a lot of kids are coming in from Central America. We have 2,166 colonias in the state of Texas. I know that your Strike Force 2.0 is something I want to work with. I want to also work with you on the 10-20-30, which is something that Clyburn and the committee have been working on. So I just want to see if we can, if you can assign somebody I can work with and the committee can work with, because I do intend to add fundings with the help of the appropriations committee members to address third world conditions called colonias.
The last time I was secretary, we had a focus on the colonias as part of our Strike Force 1.0. Certainly no reason not to continue that. Right now, our focus is on making sure there is safe and adequate water, drinking water, and waste disposal systems. Significant amount of money has been invested already by rural development in the colonias for wastewater. About $1 billion for those projects and for hospitals and clinics and energy systems to child care centers. Our budget does propose a specific increase in water infrastructure, which we think will help clean water in communities like the colonias. So very much committed to this, Representative, and we'll make sure that you have someone in the staff that is aware of what we're doing in the colonias so that you can work with them to assure yourself and your constituents that that is an area of concern and interest.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. I'm sorry, I'm running off to the floor right now, but I do want to say thank you, and I look forward to working with whoever you're assigned so we can talk about colonias. Thank you so much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cuellar. At this time, I'd like to yield to the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Grace Ming. Ms. Ming, you are now recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Bishop, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. It's great to meet you again. I am so thrilled that you will be leading this agency and look forward to working with you in my first year on this subcommittee to advocate for hunger programs like SNAP and WIC, which help many Americans, including my vulnerable constituents in Queens. As you know, food insecurity has really skyrocketed during this pandemic. The lines are longer than I've ever seen in my lifetime, and many people are relying on food assistance. There's never been a more important time to try to make SNAP more flexible. And I'm concerned in particular about the long-standing hot food exclusion of hot foods from SNAP. This policy, I believe, creates unnecessary obstacles for many who are experiencing homelessness, senior citizens, single parents, essential workers, which we saw a lot of this issue in New York during the early days of the pandemic. They were working overtime and didn't have time to go to a grocery store. And sometimes, at least in New York, there's not a grocery store nearby. I believe that this policy can't be justified from a nutrition standard when an untoasted sandwich is eligible for purchase, but a toasted sandwich is not. Many of my constituents are struggling to put food on the table and would really benefit from repealing this exclusion. For example, a single mom could benefit from buying a rotisserie chicken to use across several meals. A college student on SNAP who works to pay for school might benefit from a cup of soup from the local grocery store or deli. Those who are unhoused or living in transitional housing might not even have access to a kitchen at all. I wanted to ask what your opinion and thoughts are on potential repeal of this hot food exclusion and of more expansive SNAP policies. And would you be supportive of Congress wholly eliminating the hot food exclusion?
Congresswoman, I think it would be best for me to respond to give you sort of the principles that I'm operating under with reference to the SNAP program. First and foremost, I want that benefit to be meaningful. And that's one of the reasons why we instituted a review of the Thrifty Food Plan, which is the foundation upon which that benefit is calculated to determine whether or not it makes sense in today's world. Secondly, I want the ability of the SNAP program to be utilized by as many people as possible, which means taking a look at our application systems and making sure that we're not creating barriers to participation that are unnecessary. Third, I think we do need to learn from the recent experience in COVID as to how we might be able to make the SNAP program and the availability of benefits modernized and more convenient. That may very well address the issues that you're raising here. It may go into a variety of other directions relative to how we might incorporate restaurants into the system more fully than they are today. But I think it is worthy of us challenging ourselves to ask ourselves whether this program needs to be modernized in terms of how benefits are accessible. And finally, of course, we want to make sure the program is operated with integrity. And those are the four principles that I'm operating under. Those are the four directives that I've given to our team to work on. And I would hope that over the course of the time that I'm secretary, that we'll see progress in all four areas.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I know I don't have a lot of time left, but as a member of Mr. Clyburn's Rural Broadband Task Force, rural accessible broadband access has been something that we have prioritized, and we've especially seen the importance of during this pandemic. I wanted to ask about your plans to expand broadband access in general, but also how you might suggest or any ideas you might have in relation to how members could use potential community-funded projects or the infrastructure bill to help make this access more accessible and affordable.
There are a number of issues relative to broadband, I think, but first and foremost, that our department, USDA, needs to work in better coordination with the FCC, with NITA, with Commerce, and other agencies that are engaged and involved in expanded broadband or the regulation of broadband to ensure that we're using every single dollar as effectively as possible to get as many people served as possible. We recently clarified and simplified the rules with reference to our Reconnect program, which will, I think, go in effect next week. And we expect and anticipate that's going to expand significantly the number of communities that are available to apply for those resources. So the more resources we have in that program, as we have asked in this budget for additional resources, the more folks we can help. But we want to make sure the help we provide makes sense. So that means upload and download speeds that are adequate and sufficient to actually do the job that needs to be done. As I discussed with Representative Fortenberry, this is about making sure that this broadband is actually usable. It's not enough to say you've got broadband. It's got to be higher speed broadband. So those are some of the things we are doing relative to broadband expansion. It is about money, and the jobs plan that the President's put forward provides significant resources for this. I would strongly encourage Congress to take a very close look at that bill and that section of the bill.
Thank you, Ms. Ming. I believe your time has expired, and let me thank the committee I believe we finished our first round, and we are about to begin a second round, Mr. Secretary, and I think that comes back to me. As you may be aware, Georgia is the #1 peanut producing state in the country, and my congressional district is the #1 congressional district that produces peanuts, and I am known as the peanut congressman. The peanut industry brought their concerns about the EU non-tariff trade barriers for peanuts to USDA's attention back in 2018. Since that time, the peanut industry has had numerous USDA meetings, Zoom calls, and exchanged technical information with the EU through the AMS FAS with no success. Since 2018, peanuts have lost $160 million in the EU market. The industry leadership believes that until the EU representatives and the US peanut leaders meet, there's little hope of addressing this important issue for the peanut industry. Can you check with your staff on how we can move this issue forward for the peanut industry and possibly include a meeting with EU representatives and the US peanut industry? And let me just ask, go on to my second question so that you can answer that when you finish that. It has to do with ERS and NIFA. The previous administration devastated USDA's research capacity at ERS and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture by proposing to move large numbers of staff from the National Capital Region to Kansas City, Missouri. Many of those researchers did not want to relocate, and according to an OIG review from 2017 through 2020, ERS and NIFA experienced agency-wide staffing losses in excess of 40%. What are your plans to restore these agencies' research capacity? And can you speak to where the administration is in nominating someone for the position of Undersecretary for Research, Education, and Economics?
Mr. Chairman, we will do everything we possibly can to communicate with our EU friends the concerns of the peanut industry, and we'll obviously facilitate any conversation or meeting that's necessary. But I would say that it is very, very important for not just the USDA to weigh in on this issue, but for USTR to also weigh in on this issue. They are the ones that at the end of the day are negotiating with our friends in the EU. It's a difficult circumstance. We have a very difficult relationship with the EU. I've had conversations with the EU commissioner recently and expressed concerns about that relationship. We'll continue to knock on that door, but I think it's important for us to also have USTR also knocking on that door. In terms of NIFA, about 221 positions have been filled at NIFA and ERS, at NIFA. There are probably roughly 100 positions or so that need to be filled. There's an aggressive effort to fill those positions and to do so in a way that expands significantly the diversity within those folks who are working in NIFA. We're going to keep an eye on it as the president has instructed us to do so. And certainly it's in our best interest to make sure we have as diverse and inclusive a workforce as possible. And I'm confident that we're going to get many of those positions filled. Some of them will be filled in Kansas City, and some of them will be filled in the Washington, D.C. area.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Part of the advantage of returning to your old job is being able to hit the ground running. But you need staff to help manage the vast and the wide-ranging portfolio at USDA. We've seen nominations announced for the Deputy Secretary and the General Counsel positions. I'm particularly interested in the Undersecretary for Rural Development and the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights positions. When will the administration announce nominations for your subcabinets, and have you recommended any names to the White House?
We are working, and I should have responded to your request about RE Undersecretary as well. We are working with the Presidential Personnel Office to identify candidates and to essentially create a list of potential nominees, and then work through the process of ensuring that those folks are properly vetted before we propose their names. I would anticipate and expect in the very near future you will begin to see a series of nominations for the Undersecretary positions and some of the other key positions that are not yet filled. Trust me, Mr. Chairman, I'm just as anxious as you are to have more help. and more staff. It is not easy to operate this rather vast department without all hands on deck. So we are working as expeditiously as possible to get those positions filled, and hopefully the Senate will establish a hearing date in the near future for the general counsel, and hopefully we have a Senate vote on the deputy in the very near future.
Thank you. My time has expired, and I'm happy to yield back to Mr. Fortenberry for an additional round of questions. Mr. Fortenberry, the floor is yours.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I think it's been a thoughtful and thorough hearing thus far. Mr. Secretary, I want to return to the earlier question I raised about synthetic beef. I didn't have enough time to flesh it out, so to speak, thoroughly. I really think it's important that we work hard to dispel the myth that American livestock production is a significant contributor to climate change. When we look at the emissions charts, America's livestock producers across the world, in comparison to the world, are at the bottom. And that's because we excel in animal husbandry and innovation techniques. Years ago, there's a gentleman, a hog farmer in my district, and I know, Mr. Secretary, that you've probably been caught behind a hog truck, and there's a lot of power and energy there. Anyway, one of my hog farmers decided to try to take that energy and make it useful in a creative way, created one of the early methane digestion systems. So again, American livestock producers on the front end of both animal husbandry as well as innovation, and I would hate to see us penalized as we try to appropriately address the issue of methane in the atmosphere, which is a pass-through gas and therefore less impactful on climate change, but also in comparison to the rest of the world, how much better we do because, again, of the value of stewardship as well as innovation. I've been in meetings with Bill Gates. He made that comment. I respect Bill Gates' attempt to compel the world's wealthiest to be more socially responsible. But in this one, again, discounting the nutritional aspects, the limited impacts this would have on our environmental security, as well as the disruptions of an important economic resource for not only ourselves in America. I think it's important to help dispel that myth. Secondly, let me return also to what I raised earlier regarding the Blue Ribbon Panel. The OIG recently discovered that the department does not have a single repository of all of its research. So as we engaged in the Blue Ribbon Panel, thinking about, again, a 21st century architecture of higher education that modernizes research, makes it relevant for both regeneration and return to the farmer, as well as value adds for the students. I think having an understanding of what the research is going on at the department is a first stop, just a basic card catalog. So that's one question I'd like to raise for you. And then finally, the third question would be, can you give an update on USDA's role regarding new technologies for genetically engineered farm animals? Has the USDA studied the ethical and moral questions surrounding the genetic modification of animals? Obviously, a place where we have to tread very cautiously.
Representative, on the livestock question, I think there are three components of this. First, I think you're right. We have to make sure we lift up the messaging in terms of American agriculture and the protein production processes that are in place here. American agriculture is responsible for about 9% or so of emissions totally in this country. Worldwide, agriculture is responsible for 14–15%. So clearly, we are doing a better job across the board. I think there are technologies that will help us reduce methane. There are feed additives that could potentially reduce it. I would say that what we have to do is have a regulatory system that allows those feed additives to get into our feed quicker. Basically, what we have today is a situation where it's treated as if it was a pharmaceutical product, which creates a tremendous lag time in getting that technology into the field. Our competitors are not waiting. Europe, New Zealand, others are utilizing these feed additives to reduce their methane. We need to be on top of that. And then I think there is technology for the conversion of methane and the utilization of technology to convert manure, all of which I think can significantly accelerate our efforts and need to be so. On the depository, this is surprising to me because when I left USDA, we were trying to create a way in which we could have public access to all the research that we had publicly funded over a period of time to accelerate the utilization of that research in new development. So I'm not sure what's happened between the time I left and now, but I'm certainly going to look into it. I would agree with you. It makes sense to have a repository on genetically engineering farm animals. Frankly, I'll need to do some checking on that. It's clear we should be asking those questions if we haven't. I want to make sure if we've asked them in the right way. I want to find out what information we have. I don't know the answer to that question today as I sit, but I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. At this time, I'd like to recognize the chair of our full committee, Ms. Rosa DeLauro, for any additional questions you may have. The floor is now yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to just ask two questions. One is about foodborne illness from meat and poultry, Mr. Secretary. And the USDA has failed to make any progress on reducing illnesses from Salmonella and Campylobacter. It's about 3 million illnesses every year because of the resistance to one or more of the antibiotics. Despite the department's work on performance standards for the bacteria in the poultry slaughterhouses, the rate of laboratory diagnosed infections among people was actually higher at the close of the decade than it had been at the start. So the agency has been criticized by both consumer groups and industry for having outdated performance standards that are not based on risks posed by the bacteria. And consumer groups and victims of foodborne illness have submitted 2 petitions to the agency asking for enforceable standards. So the first question is, what do you intend to do to respond to the petitions, create updated enforceable standards to ensure food safety and to protect consumers? And the last question is about waivers for school meals. And I applaud your dedication to child nutrition. And last month, the department extended several nationwide waivers that will ensure children receive healthy meals through the summer when schools are out of session. We've heard the department is considering the extension of certain waivers for school meals for the fall. School districts across the country need to prepare for the fall, providing them with this continuity, if you will. Can you explain the department's current thinking and when you plan to announce a decision?
On the petitions, Madam Chair, I would ask that you give me an opportunity to be better versed on the nature of those petitions. But I would say as a general proposition, we should do everything we can to ensure the safety of the food that we're providing to Americans. And if there are concerns, if there are issues where we are taking a step back instead of a step forward, we need to take a step forward. And certainly when I was secretary before, we made an effort to try to take a step forward. If that wasn't sufficient, wasn't adequate, then I think we need to obviously revisit what can be done and should be done to ensure the safety of food that's being provided to Americans. That's a sacred responsibility we have, and we need to take it seriously. On the waivers, I would expect and anticipate that we're going to have information on that in the very, very near future. I certainly understand that schools are waiting to know precisely how the system's going to work during the next school year, and we want to give them plenty of time to make sure that they have things in order. I would say that there are 2 issues here. One is the issue of are we going to continue to have universal free meals? My feeling is I want to make sure that we feed as many kids as possible, and we want to feed them nutritious food. That's my attitude, and that hopefully can be expressed in policies that we adopt. Secondly, there is the issue of the nutrition standards, and I think it's important for us to work collaboratively with school districts in a way that allows them the resources. This is what I said earlier about funding your priorities. If nutrition is a priority, then we need to provide the resources for school districts to provide healthy, nutritious meals. It ought to be a priority. And frankly, I think it's cost effective if we do this, because over time, we're going to spend a heck of a lot less on diabetes, for example.
Just a quick comment on the standards. Look, I look forward to working with you on this. We need final product standards for the most dangerous types of bacteria and requiring the large poultry operations to minimize foodborne risks in their production practices. But we'll have further conversations about that. On the issue of agriculture research and climate change, if I might, what ways do you think that USDA, the agencies and resources be utilized to identify agricultural practices that are needed to mitigate climate change, but incentivize their use and adoption among farmers?
A couple of things. First, we need to make sure we have proper measurement and certification programs so that we can create market opportunities for investment in those practices. Secondly, we need to make sure we are targeting and focusing the conservation resources that you all provide us in a way that advances those climate smart agricultural practices. We have 45 different practices that we know will have a positive impact on soil health, have a positive impact on water quality, will have a positive impact on carbon sequestration. We ought to be helping to fund those 45 practices. Farmers are anxious to do it. But this is really important. This is maybe the most important thing I'm going to say today. 89.6% of farms in this country today, 89.6% of the farms in this country today, the majority of income for the farm families operating those farms does not come from the farm. So when we basically say, hey, farmer, you need to do X, Y, and Z, they're not making enough money, most of them, to do that. So that's why it's important for us as a department to focus on new markets and more markets and better markets so that we create greater profitability. So if we're anxious for climate, then let's invest in those practices, make it easy for farmers to do so. Let's create markets that reward them for doing this and pay them for doing this and create, in essence, a new revenue stream for them so that we don't have 89.6% of our farms not producing enough money so that the majority of what is earned comes from that farm as opposed to off-farm income.
Thank you, Mr.
Time has
Lara.
expired, and I look forward to working with you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you.
I believe Dr. Harris is next, if he is ready. Dr. Harris, you are recognized for any additional questions that you may have. Not hearing from Dr. Harris, let me recognize Mr. Valadeo for any additional questions.
Appreciate the time, Mr. Chairman, again. And Mr. Secretary, as you know, agriculture exports from the West Coast, before I continue on, I was in the middle of another call as well, so hopefully this wasn't addressed, but this is an important topic. And I know that the export issue was brought up a little bit, but as you know, agriculture exports from the West, especially from California, are facing unfair treatment due to the lack of export containers and lack of willingness for shipping carriers to move our goods, but China is paying a higher fee to have the containers returned to China completely empty, leaving U.S. exports behind. The Federal Maritime Commission currently has an investigation underway on this serious issue. These exporters need all the help they can get right now. Coupled with excessive shipping costs, detention, demurrage fees, exporters are struggling to meet contract deadlines in our critical Asian markets, jeopardizing important trade relationships. Will you commit working with me, this committee, the White House, Department of Transportation, and the Federal Maritime Commission to find both an immediate solution to free up port congestion and a long-term fix to ensure that these delays and exorbitant costs are avoided in the future?
Congressman, we are already working collaboratively and certainly have encouraged the Maritime Commission to take action immediately, which they have the jurisdiction and capacity to do to begin to alleviate this very serious problem. So we are very concerned about it, as you are. Happy to work with you on it.
I appreciate that. And then Secretary Vilsack, you've been a leader on speaking out about USMCA enforcement. However, we have yet to hear from the Biden administration on enforcement of Canadian commitments on dairy, as well as Mexico's numerous roadblocks erected against our agriculture exports. There's been proliferation of Mexican regulations and product standards that serve little purpose other than to impede trade. Will you commit to work with interagency partners in the White House to ramp up engagement with Mexico to work out these differences so we could continue to trade our vital products?
Have visited with the Mexican ag minister about these specific issues. It was the second call that I made. The first call was to the Canadian minister. to raise issues on USMCA, and certainly have indicated a desire and concern to work, a desire and opportunity to work with USTR to make sure that the provisions of the USMCA that provide for enforcement, provide for collaboration and for consultation are utilized when and if it turns out that our trading partners aren't living up to the letter or spirit of the agreement.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to put the rest of my questions in for the record, and I appreciate the time, Mr. Secretary. Thank you again for testifying. And I'm done, so I'll yield back the rest of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Valadeo. Ms. Pingree, you're now recognized for an additional round.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary, I want to follow up on some report language I secured last year, encouraging NRCS to establish a composting conservation practice in CSP and EQIP. Something that's been a focus of mine for a while, and I know that NRCS is also moving forward this year with an interim conservation practice on soil carbon amendments, including compost and biochar. Can you give me an update on the efforts at NRCS to include the use of compost in conservation programs?
Congressman, if you'll allow me to ask my staff to get back to you on that issue. I don't know the specifics of it. I would be surprised that we're not utilizing every opportunity to create ways in which we can provide help and assistance to farmers, and that may be one of them. But I don't know the answer to your question, and I wouldn't even want to try to fake it. So
that's okay. You've put in 2 long hours with us, and I didn't expect you to be on top of everything, although compost is an important topic. But so let's go to a tough one, PFAS. Unfortunately, my state of Maine has been a little bit ahead of the curve when it comes to identifying and responding to the emerging threat of PFAS contamination. Over the past few years, a small number of dairy farms in Maine have identified PFAS contamination in the milk. Unfortunately, this difficult situation is even more challenging because of a lack of resources available to help affected producers. The Dairy Indemnity Payment Program gives a little bit of short-term relief, but is not sufficient to address the full scope of the problem. Maine might be ahead of the curve, but I know we're not the only state where this is an issue or will be an issue. So can you tell me how you're approaching the issue of PFAS contamination across the department, from research to farm support to food safety? And what further assistance can the USDA offer in terms of longer-term programmatic and financial support for farms that are affected by PFAS contamination?
We're taking a look at the Dairy Indemnification Program to see whether or not it actually is structured in a way that is meaningful. I think what we think it probably makes sense to provide compensation over a short period of time for milk that is impacted and affected. But perhaps if there's a long-term, more permanent situation that you're dealing with, it may be better for the farmer to provide assistance in terms of reimbursing for the stock, the dairy cows that may be impacted by this. So we're looking at ways in which we can better support our dairy farmers who are confronted with this. Secondly, you mentioned across the country, and certainly this is a big issue in New Mexico, and it has something to do with the Defense Department. So we're obviously reaching out to the Defense Department to encourage them to also understand the responsibilities that they may have in this space as well. I don't know what research we're doing on this, but I will be happy to ask our team if there are research projects, and certainly let you know about them. And if they're not, whether or not they would consider the possibility of such a project in Maine.
Well, thank you for that. I know I'm fortunate enough to sit on the MilCon committee, and Chair Wasserman Schultz recently held a hearing on PFAS where we got to hear from the Defense Department, and my understanding is that there has not been sufficient analysis of where the contamination is. So I do think, like the New Mexico situation, there's probably a great deal of contamination near military bases and airstrips. And I do hope that USDA can work closely with the Department of Defense to push them to take responsibility for that and the cleanup. And I'll just also reinforce, I appreciate the support on compensation for milk, but I think your second suggestion that for many farmers, this level of contamination, PFAS is a forever chemical. It's often in the land for a variety of reasons. can't really be effectively remediated or removed, or at least we don't know how to now. And for some farmers, it's a complete loss of their stock and all of their livelihood. So I'll look forward to, staying in touch with the department on that and how we're going to deal with that really tragic situation that many farmers find themselves in, or some farmers find themselves in, and possibly more will in the future. And there's really no way to get back your livelihood in some situations. So I'll yield back the rest of my time, but thank you for being willing to look into that. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ms. Pingree. Mr. Newhouse, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the second round. Mr. Secretary, my state, particularly in Central Washington, we are a significant producer of organic agriculture, and I just wanted to kind of add on to the thought process Mrs. Pingree and her questioning with the organic rulemaking and standard. USDA has missed statutory deadlines to finalize the origin of livestock rule, a rule that is actually a legacy item under your previous tenure. And this is part of a troubling pattern. Over the last 12 years, over 20 recommendations to update the organic standards have passed the National Organic Standards Board. And USDA has not implemented a single one of those. Congress has increased the National Organic Program's budget by at least 50% in the last 5 years, and they now have more than 65 full-time staff. And so my question is, do you have any information on why these standards continue to remain unresolved?
I think one of the things we have to do, Representative, is to lift up the organic program within USDA. We began that process in the Obama administration, and am committed to doing that in this administration. It's a value-added opportunity. It's one of those more, better, and new markets opportunities. I think there are a number of ways in which we can provide help and assistance. On the livestock rule, obviously, as time goes by, things change. We changed several aspects of that rule and want to make sure that we have additional comment to make sure we're on the strongest legal basis and ground. But I think what you're going to see some of those rules being coming out in the not too distant future. Others, we may have to start from scratch, as I indicated earlier. I don't know specifically. To be honest with you, your question kind of surprised me because we did put a lot of emphasis on organic when I was secretary before. So I'm surprised that we didn't improve any of those standards. I'd like to go back and ask the question why that is so, because I would have thought it was, given the amount of attention and effort that we had in expanding crop insurance protection for organic and trying to protect the organic brand and all the other things that we did. So I'm not sure why we haven't followed through on those standards. We should.
Well, I know you've been a strong supporter of the organics program overall, and so we'd love to continue that conversation if you have a chance to look at that. But again, appreciate you being with us today, and look forward to continuing a strong working relationship. And I'll yield back my time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newhouse. I'd like to now recognize Mr. Pocan from Wisconsin. You are now recognized for an additional round.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, sorry to do that speed round last time. I didn't know we were going to have a second round. That was the most impressive I've seen any secretary talk concisely on answers. I just want to let you know from 8.5 years here. Let me just make a couple comments. Broadband, I helped form a bipartisan rural broadband caucus. Anything we can do to help work with you on this, we would be interested. Just 3 years ago, I got broadband. We've been out there for 7. And, up to that point, I got the deal, the half price sale at $300 a month for 40 measured gigs. And an hour on Netflix is 2.5 gigs. So, often I would call my husband at the end of the month and tell him to quit watching TV when I was out here in order to, at $15 a gig beyond that, it gets a little pricey. So certainly understand it. We want to work with you on that. I completely agree with the full chair of the committee around the line speeds and the safety for the workers in the meatpacking industry. And not just what we saw happen in the last administration, but also with COVID, really illustrates that problem. I completely agree on the SNAP benefits. You know, my freshman term, we had a challenge. Some of us for a week lived on the $31.50 that we got. My office said I was an ornery SOB. You know, a bag of oranges was $6, right? I mean, and you know, you couldn't eat very healthy. I had ramen noodles and things like that to supplement it out. The fact that we're basically flat leveled in real dollars means we've got to decrease the level of what people can spend money on. Completely agree. If we could get that benefit up to people, best program to keep kids out of poverty, would love to see that. I want to get that out just because, again, I really appreciated your answers. My question just is going to involve some of your other expertise too, is around dairy farms. You know, we lost in 2019, 818 family dairy farms in Wisconsin. Last year, it was only one per day, you know, over 350 farms in Wisconsin. This is tough. And I'm just wondering, you know, what is your kind of vision for the future, specifically of the dairy industry? And what can we be doing on this side for the family farmers? Because, you know, these people, many of them have had farms for generations. They're Democrats, they're Republicans. Most of them are likely independents as I talk to them. This is a big concern.
Let me start with the traditional answer that you would get from a Secretary of Agriculture, the importance of exports. Obviously, it's important and necessary for us to continue to expand the sale of dairy products worldwide so that we can stabilize the price and make sure that farmers can stay in business. I think it's also important that we create opportunities for those dairy farmers to have local and regional markets, the ability to negotiate their own price, if you will, in terms of sales to schools, sales to universities, sales to any institutional purchaser. And so supporting local and regional food systems, we just announced over $300 million of support and help to local and regional food systems just yesterday as part of our outreach effort to try to create that alternative market. I think and we can provide the ability of those dairy farmers to also add value to their products. Maybe it's a small cheese shop, maybe it's an ice cream parlor. There are ways in which they can become processors as well as producers. And then I will tell you, climate has a tremendous opportunity for dairy. If you are essentially basically paying dairy for reducing methane or capturing methane and converting it into electricity and fuel, that's a new product. If you are creating opportunities for that manure that's being produced in the dairy operation to become an ingredient instead of going to the landfill or being over-applied on land and causing some issues, if it can be an ingredient in a new material, a new chemical, a new fabric, a new fiber, a new fuel source, we need to be doing much more of that creates another revenue stream for farmers. And then, frankly, you know, there's a lot of competition out there for consumption, and the dairy industry, I think, recognizes that, and they're now looking for ways in which the ingredients within dairy can be segregated and utilized in a very high value way. Whey protein, huge protein source. Can we convert more of that into more nutritious sports drinks and snacks and things of that nature that creates additional market opportunities for the dairy products? So it's a combination of all of those things in order to provide the most effective way of keeping as many people on the farm as possible.
Yeah, we're also seeing some of the younger farmers go into organic, and that's been successful for some. And also they're getting together and working through a single processor to make different types of cheese. And again, trying to address some of what you're talking about. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Pocain. I think I would normally recognize Dr. Harris, but it's my understanding that Dr. Harris has no more questions. And if that is correct, I will then yield to Ms. Underwood for an additional round of questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to follow up on WIC. Are you considering other actions beyond outreach to improve WIC, particularly with a specific focus on improving maternal health and addressing the Black maternal mortality crisis?
We are going to look at the resources that have been provided to the rescue plan, I think, create opportunities for us to take a look at ways in which we can expand the impact of WIC. Let me give you an example of one kind of partnership that might be available that we need to be thinking about. there's an organization called Count the Kicks. It's an organization that basically encourages moms to be able to count the kicks periodically, and if the kicks get below a certain number, then it may indicate that there's some problems. And in minority populations, there are higher rates of stillborn babies than in white population. And so this is an opportunity potentially for a collaboration between an organization like that and WIC to basically co-promote each other so that you are counting the kicks and having healthier babies being born, and also providing those moms and those babies and children with more nutritious food at the beginning of life. So I think there are ways in which we can look for those kinds of partnerships with organizations that have a mutual interest, if you will. And I'm certainly interested in your thoughts about how best to do that, ideas that you have from your congressional district that could be incorporated in that effort to try to find creative ways to make WIC more attractive, to make WIC more effective, to make WIC participation at higher rates.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. I do just want to note that, the stillborn and infant mortality and infant health issues are incredibly important, but so is what's happening to our moms. And the fact that mothers continue to die at 3 to 4 times, Black mothers continue to die at the rate of 3 to 4 times than the white moms in our country in terms of maternal mortality. And I think that the WIC program is a unique tool that we have, particularly to extend WIC coverage in the breastfeeding and postpartum period. And so we will certainly be following up with you on that. We do have legislation to that end, the Social Determinants for Moms Act. And I think that this is certainly part of an equity agenda that the Biden-Harris administration would support. And it's Black Maternal Health Week, so I had to make sure to cover that. Now, I want to shift a little bit and bring your attention to a bipartisan bill that I introduced with Congressman Gallagher this week, the Farmers Fighting Climate Change Act. And this bill would support producers on the front lines of the climate crisis by establishing climate change mitigation bundles within the Conservation Stewardship Program. I believe my bill fits in well with your ambitious climate change agenda at USDA, and I look forward to working with you to advance solutions that are fair to our farmers and have real impact on the climate crisis. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. Ms. Wasserman-Schultz, you're now recognized for an additional round.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to do Florida citrus and ask you about the Citrus Health Response Program, or CHIRP, and the HLB MAC program, which are two critical programs that in the fight to protect the U.S. citrus crop from disease. Can you give us a status update on the work of these two important programs? And is there anything more you need from Congress for these programs to be successful? We talked about citrus greening disease and other diseases that are continuing to ravage citrus crops in Florida and beyond. And I really want to see, how we can continue to ramp up our efforts.
Well, we have obviously worked collaboratively with state governments and local governments and other federal agencies on the issue of citrus greening in particular. As I said earlier, we have had over 100 projects that have been funded through the MAC. And obviously, some of them we're beginning to see some indication of success. We've had an attract and kill device that has been particularly effective in trying to reduce the risk of the psyllid that causes citrus greening. We obviously have to continue that effort and provide resources for that effort until we finally figure out how to end this scourge on the citrus crop. I think we also have to take a look at, we have additional funding in the specialty crop pests and appropriated line item, and obviously additional resources will make a difference in terms of detection and in terms of management and therapeutics. All of that, I think, and I think there's a continued research effort that is also underway. So a variety of things that we're trying to do in an effort to try to respond to this issue. But it is a tough one. And part of what's interesting about coming back to a job that I had before is the expectation you're going to come back to new problems, but the reality is you come back to a lot of the old problems, and this is one of them. And it's tragic.
Yeah, feels a little like Groundhog Day on this issue. I also want to touch on the Animal Welfare Act and how the USDA implemented it and enforces it through the animal care program in the last administration. In 2017, I think you know the USDA abruptly pulled all of its animal welfare inspection reports and enforcement records from its searchable public website. Those records were only restored after we included language in the FY20 approach bill to direct the agency to restore public access. But there are still ongoing problems with the animal care program. For example, the agency completely stopped conducting inspections at licensed facilities in 2020, but they continue to provide licenses to new businesses without ever having visited the facilities. And they also appeared to substitute virtual inspections without providing any detail to Congress and to the public about how they'd be conducted. Can you tell us how you and the USDA are going to examine what's happening in the animal care program so we can ensure that this part of the agency operates transparently and effectively? And really, I want to just underscore that the agency needs to be able to carry out its role of ensuring animal welfare standards are met. And since the last administration, the USDA's capacity to do that, double down and make sure that that we can enforce that law.
Congresswoman, we had a glitch in technology. I think I got the gist of your question, and I'll try to respond to it. Okay. First and foremost, I want to take a look at. You mentioned virtual inspections. I want to take a look at how many of the 5,620 inspections that took place in the last fiscal year were actually virtual, and why, to make sure that those are indeed inspections as opposed to just simply a number. And I think there is a Supreme Court decision that has complicated the efforts at the department in terms of enforcement and assessing penalties. I want to make sure I understand fully and completely the impact of that Supreme Court decision and how we're going to respond to it to make sure that once we do an inspection, once we find a problem, that we can actually do something about it, and how we can do it in a way that is not subject to question. This is an important area, and it's one that I sometimes people take a look at the large programs at USDA. In the scheme of things, in terms of budgets, it's a smaller program, but it has profound impact, and we will take animal welfare very seriously in this administration.
Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Wasserman-Schultz. Let me just say to the Secretary, we so gratefully appreciate your being so generous with your time. I think we're getting toward the end, but I do have one additional question I'd like to pose to you. It's regarding the Equity Commission. Last month, you said that you were in the process of establishing an Equity Commission at USDA. We're all familiar with USDA's troubled history with minority farmers, especially Black farmers. Can you tell us a little more about the Equity Commission and what you hope it will accomplish, and what can you do in the short term and over the next few years to address this very long-standing problem? You mentioned in an interview how farm subsidies are partly to blame for the disparities. Do you plan on looking broadly at the programs and their impacts on equity in advance of the next farm bill? And of course, the recently passed American Rescue Plan included $5 billion to assist socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. Can you give us an update on where you are in the implementation, who will get it, when they will get it, how will you go about allocating the funding, and will you allow for any input and collaboration in the establishment of the commission?
I appreciate the question, and we have been incredibly busy with limited staff trying to address as quickly as possible the provisions of the American Rescue Plan that relate to socially disadvantaged producers and Black farmers. As you know, we have, for the first time ever in the department, a senior equity advisor, Dr. Dwayne Goldman. He and the team at the Farm Service Agency are working diligently on the debt relief effort. There are two classifications of debtors. There are those who have direct loans with the USDA. There are those who have guaranteed loans. On the guaranteed side, one of the first things we did was to advise the banks not to take any adverse actions against producers who might have been delinquent or who might have been subject to foreclosure. And indicated that if they were to take such action, USDA would enforce its capacity to take the loan back, and that would prevent any additional foreclosures, any additional evictions, if you will. We are now in the process of accumulating from those guaranteed lenders information concerning the amount of prepayment penalties and other costs that might be associated so that we can accurately calculate the actual debt that is to be forgiven, which will have an impact on the 20%, as you know, Mr. Chairman, that goes to farmers to help assist them with the tax issues. We want to make sure that we do everything we can to do two things. One, to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks. We have, I think, a fairly good list and a fairly good idea of how many people have direct loans and guarantee loans, but that doesn't mean that it's infallible or that it's going to be perfect. So we're going to align ourselves with community building organizations in an effort to make sure that they are helping us identify anyone who might be eligible for this effort, for this relief, to make sure that when we provide the relief, that it's as comprehensive as possible. Secondly, when we provide the relief, there are tax consequences. There are federal tax consequences. There may be state tax consequences. That's why the 20% was added. And I might add that it's important for us to make sure that people are aware of that and that they receive the kind of technical advice necessary, especially if they're farmers, to be able to avoid paying any more tax than they absolutely have to. There is a 3-year averaging program that's available to farmers that allows you to average your income over a 3-year period. So if you have a large sum of money in 1 year, but not much income in the other 2 years, you can spread that large amount of money over that 3-year period, lowering your tax burden and hopefully falling within or close to the 20% that's being provided. So we want to make sure that those who receive this help and assistance are aware of that, aware of how of the tax challenge that they may face and strategies for dealing with it. So we're trying to align ourselves and will align ourselves with organizations that provide information to folks who participate in this program. So I can assure you that we are moving expeditiously on this. Our goal is to try to get these debts relieved as quickly as possible. Again, we have a pretty good handle on how many there are. We're now in the process of beginning to figure out where we do the outreach to community building organizations, how we send out information to those who will participate in this program so that they fully understand how it's going to work. That's all going to happen in a very, very short period of time. The Equity Commission is a commission that we think has to be formed under FACA, so we will be going through that process, which will allow you and others to have input on nominations for that commission. We see this as an external expert-led review of various programs at USDA, starting with those that are customer-facing, where we've had the most significant issues with reference to program complaints. We expect that commission to do an external review to identify systemic barriers and to make recommendations for how we might be able to improve our programs. While that is going on, the president has also signed an executive order requiring us to also do an internal review of our efforts, and that is also underway. Working groups have been established in every single area of the USDA. Leads have been identified. Work is beginning on doing the internal equity review to make sure that we are also doing whatever we can do immediately to create a fair and more equitable USDA. And I might comment on the subsidy issue, Mr. Chairman. I think it's important for people to understand what this is really all about. This is about the cumulative effect of discrimination. If you were a black farmer 20 years ago and you went into the FSA office, maybe you didn't get a loan, or maybe you got the loan later than your white counterpart, or maybe you got a loan at an interest rate or charges that were higher. You couldn't plant your crop in a timely way. Your crop didn't produce as much as it might have produced for a white farmer who planted in a timely way because they got the full access of USDA programs. Over a period of time, those disparities allowed farmers who got the full advantage to expand their operation, to get the latest technology. The black farmer didn't have that advantage. Now we have a situation where we have programs that essentially compensate farmers in times of need based on production. If your production is lower than your neighbors, you're going to get less. We saw this in COVID relief. It's important to note this. There are several studies that indicated that of the COVID relief that was out, that's already been paid out, not anywhere from 95 to 99% of it went to white farmers, and somewhere between 1 and 5% went to socially disadvantaged farmers. Of those who have identified, who have self-identified, we know that there's roughly 25% of farmers who self-identified either white or black. Of that number, black farmers received $20 million of assistance. White farmers, $5.5 billion of assistance. The gap grows wider. And so what we're trying to do with debt relief, what we're trying to do with the Equity Commission, what we're trying to do with the additional resources for market development and land access is to establish the opportunity for more farmers to stay on the land, for more farmers to get in the farming business so that we have great diversity within our farming population. I apologize for taking too long with that answer, Mr. Chairman, but it is a very important set of questions you've asked.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Dr. Harris did not get to ask a second round, and I suspect that he may have an interest on that question, so I will yield to Dr. Harris for any additional questions that he might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Know that I listened intently to that. My questions, one follow-up question on the estate tax issue is you didn't deal with the stepped-up basis. That was one of the things that President Biden said was going to, that he planned to change, and changing the estate tax. Obviously, stepped-up basis is very important for multi-generational farms. And the other thing is just to make certain that when the USDA does broadband initiatives, that they're qualifying the contractors appropriately, because we need to get this work done as soon as possible. And the last thing we need to do is to deal with contractors who may not be able to, who give you a good bid, but they're not able to deliver. I mean, we need to have a deliverable on that. So if you could address those two issues, stepped up basis and the contracting for broadband.
Well, I will certainly make sure that, and I'm sure the Treasury folks are fully understand this issue of stepped up basis, but we'll make sure that they understand it in the context of the farming community. As a practical matter, the stepped up basis matters intently if you have to sell the farm. All right. In other words, if my wife and I own a farm, the value has appreciated significantly over the period of time we've owned it. When we die, our sons basically get the farm. Under the current rules, they get a stepped up basis. If they sold the farm the next day, they wouldn't pay any tax. But if they keep the farm, the stepped up basis is not an issue. It only becomes an issue when and if you want to sell the farm. And so there's an issue there. And I think there's some creative thoughts that we can put into play as they mix and mingle and think about all of these issues. Happy to make sure that that we're reaching out and making sure folks understand and appreciate the potential impact on those farmers who decide to sell their land. Those farmers who decide to keep the land and keep farming it, this is really, in a sense, the stepped up basis doesn't have any impact because they're not going to pay any tax because they're going to keep the farm. They're going to keep farming the farm. So it's a specific subset of people within agriculture that could potentially be impacted and affected by this.
Okay, may I object, Mr. Secretary, and if the gentleman, Dr. Harris, would yield? This is a very issue of very intense interest. Particularly, the American Farm Bureau has it at the top of their priority list as we look at possible additional revenues for affording the infrastructure package. The estate tax is one that they are really afraid of, and they've been pushing as a part of their agenda for years to try to reduce it or eliminate it. And of course, Mr. Harris raises Dr. Harris raises a great question. And so I just hope that you will continue to consider the impact that it will have on family farms, as well as other small businesses, family-owned businesses, I should say, because it could have a tremendous impact on keeping those entities in business.
Mr. Chairman, I think There will always be a debate and conversation about this, and it obviously depends on the level of exemptions that may or may not be available. Today, I think it's roughly $11 million per couple, and that there are just not that many farming operations that are above that number. Of those that are, you also have special use valuation that allows you to reduce the value of your land. And of those who even after they reduce the value are still subject potentially to estate tax, there are ways in which that tax can be paid over a period of time where frankly the farm doesn't have to be sold and doesn't have to be lost. So I think people have to understand it's a complicated issue. There are lots of different sub-issues involved with this that oftentimes don't get discussed because people think if there's an estate tax, then virtually every farm is going to be subject to it. That may or may not be the case depending upon the level of the exemption and depending upon what is done with special use valuation and what is done with the payment structure and time period that you have to pay any estate tax that's owed. So I understand it's a difficult issue. I understand Farm Bureau is very interested in this. I understand why these questions are being asked, but I think it's important for us as we deal with this issue that we understand the full range of what we're talking about and how few farms ultimately will be potentially impacted depending upon the level of, and small business, depending upon the level of the exemptions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Dr. Harris, I usurped some of your time, and if you have additional questions, you may reclaim it.
Thank you. No, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just, Mr. Secretary, the concern is, you don't always sell the whole farm. If the exemption is lowered enough, then the families would have to sell some of the farm, all of it, of course, subject to or not subject to stepped up basis. So that's the issue there. It's not, it's not just black and white. You either sell the whole farm or none. In the case of owing estate taxes, you might choose to sell some. So it's important even if you don't sell the whole farm. But if you could just quickly address the broadband and what the department is doing to make certain that we're getting this deliverable as quickly as possible.
Well, we took a look at the Reconnect program, understood the way it was structured. Very few communities would actually have benefited from the program, and those that wouldn't necessarily have the upload and download speeds necessary to make it meaningful. So we made adjustments to the program to make more communities eligible and to make sure that the service they get is meaningful. Your point is well taken. In the interest of time to get things done, you can't sacrifice quality. And so it'll be necessary for us to make sure that as bids are being awarded, as grants are being awarded, that they're being awarded to folks that show the capacity and the capability of actually doing what they say they're going to do and a track record of being able to prove that they can do it. Otherwise, we could subject ourselves to a lot of money being spent and poor performance resulting in no broadband and money spent, which is certainly not what we want.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Thank you. I understand that Mr. Fortenberry has no additional questions, and I think we have come to the end of our hearing. And so I want to just thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your testimony, for spending almost 3 hours with us today. But I do say to you that perhaps this was not as much time as you spent the last time that you were on the Hill to testify with our authorizing committee. But we're glad that you're back, bringing with you your deep knowledge of the department and your invaluable experience to help lift up rural America and our farmers and ranchers. I wish you the best of luck, and we look forward to working with you as we continue the FY22 appropriations process. Along with what we've discussed, we will also forward additional questions for the record, and we'll appreciate your diligence in getting your responses to us and staff in a timely manner. At this time, I recognize Mr. Fortenberry for any closing remarks that he may have.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, we're just really grateful for your impressive and thoughtful command of the full range of agricultural issues. It's a very complicated business, but it does show in those complications how this touches so much of America and how important it is. So thank you for being our messenger. Thank you. I do have two quick comments, Mr. Chairman. I won't make them questions so as to not violate what you imposed upon me a moment ago, but just to point out to the Secretary, Mr. Secretary, it's my understanding that the NRCS doesn't allow animal and crop programs together. And obviously regenerative agriculture, some of the front leading edge regenerative agricultural dynamics require this. I want to put that on your radar screen. Maybe we can talk about that another time. One other thing, Mr. Chairman, if you can indulge me, and the Secretary brought this up indirectly. Look, we're living in the space of some contradiction here with our nutrition programs. Obviously, food is nutrition, but food has to be health. Food is also medicine. So we're feeding more kids than ever, but we have a 1,000-fold increase in childhood diabetes, things that we all need to work hard to address. So again, Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for your willingness to spend all this time with us. Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate the opportunity to dialogue in, again, this thorough way with you and with the entire committee. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry, and thank you to all of the members for your attendance and your participation. I think it's been very, very helpful and enlightening. And let me also thank the staff who worked so hard to put this hearing together and for it to work out as smoothly as it has. With that, again, thank you, Mr. Secretary. And this hearing is now adjourned.